Disclaimer. This video is part 2 in a 4-part series called Beyond Discovery, a Pikmin Series Retrospective. Beyond Discovery was initially conceived and is being written as a single cohesive experience. This means that each part in this series is written as though it is part of one large video, despite being separated into multiple smaller videos. This decision has been made to give myself more time and flexibility to ensure this series is of the highest quality possible. Thus, any inconsistencies you may notice in these videos as compared to my other content are most likely because of this approach. That being said, each part is being written with the intent of being able to be enjoyed as its own experience. However, this video is still a part 2, and will directly follow up on the points I made in my Pikmin 1 retrospective video, which can be found on my channel. This video can be enjoyed on its own, but I highly suggest watching the series in order to get the full experience of Beyond Discovery. But what does that word mean? Discovery. Well, in the context of Pikmin, I'd like to imagine it as a sense of wonder. The feeling you get when exploring a brand new area for the first time, or discovering details you hadn't seen before. But it's more than just that. Pikmin has an inherent grasp on its player base that can't quite be put into words. Is it the characters, the gameplay, the story, the level design? Maybe, but I'd argue it's a combination of everything. Pikmin, at its core, can never be experienced in its entirety. Everyone will have a different experience with this franchise, a different method of discovery. On April 29th, 2004, Pikmin 2 would release for the Nintendo GameCube. On August 30th of that same year, the game would receive a release in North America. Being an already established franchise, Pikmin 2 had far less to prove than its predecessor, but that doesn't mean the game lacked the same creative spark of innovation that pioneered the franchise's creation. Naturally, there isn't too much to talk about in the way of Pikmin 2's creation, in comparison to the first game. With that game, we discussed the inception of Pikmin as a concept and its many iterations before it became what we know it as today. Pikmin 2 obviously does not have that level of information on its creation since the title is just a direct sequel. However, we do still have a decent bit to discuss in the way of its development. So let's take a quick step back and discuss the years in between the first two Pikmin games, and how the franchise expanded in that time. First up, on the same day as the release of Pikmin 1, Olimar was added as a trophy to Smash Melee. You could unlock the trophy by having save data for Pikmin saved on the same memory card as Smash Melee. It's not much, but it's cool that it was included, especially considering that these two games dropped on the same day in many regions. Commercials for Pikmin 1 were rampant throughout Japan, including the song I No Uta, or Song of Love, which was received very positively even from those uninterested in the game itself. Many Japanese speakers related to the lyrics of the song. The song is from the perspective of the Pikmin and was used in numerous advertisements for the original game. It details the Pikmin recounting their purpose and fleeting lives, with roughly translated lyrics saying, "I hope this time we will go out quietly," and "We carry, fight, multiply, and are eaten." Even without the context of Pikmin, the song ended up being known for its grim representation of life as a whole. It's a somber song, but is also pretty and reflective. It's a great song. I highly recommend listening to the English cover by Siri Okami here on YouTube. It's a great rendition, and is only 15... Wait. This video is 15 years old? What? Dude, I remember listening to this cover when I was a little kid. I remember when it was like 5 years old. Oh my god, there are probably people watching this video who are younger than this cover. Is this what it feels like to be an adult? I don't like it. In the background, the development team got to work on an asset reusing sequel to release in the middle of the GameCube generation. Now, this is the part where I would normally talk about all the fun little facts we have about the game's development, but we really don't have many of those. Pikmin 2 was a quick follow-up, and we don't have much information about any scrapped features or otherwise interesting notes about the game's development. but I guess there just hasn't been much for the team to talk about in regards to this entry in the franchise. Pikmin 1 obviously had a ton due to it being the start of the series, and other entries, as we'll see later, had many alterations that have been talked about openly. But I suppose with Pikmin 2 just being a follow-up on the same console, not much needed to be said that wasn't already covered when the devs discussed what it was like working on the original game. Although what I can say is Pikmin 2 received a lot of advertising. Not just in Japan, but all around the world. Nintendo put their all into getting people's eyes on this entry, from Japanese commercials with a brand new song titled Tane no Uta, to even commercials abroad featuring many different scenarios to try and sell the concept of Pikmin, like this hot dog commercial. Yep, take a look at this. This is official. Nintendo really advertised Pikmin 2 like this. The game also received quite a bit of a push online. The GameCube was the first generation of Nintendo games to be released in the era of the internet, and while it took a bit for Nintendo to catch on, because as we all know, they're always at least 5 years late to every trend, but when they did, they decided to use the internet in order to push Pikmin 2 into the spotlight, mainly through the Pikmin.com Space Force game. Not much is known about this game. By all intents and purposes, it's lost media. All the information we have about the site and the game it was attached to is from a few screenshots, some asset dumps, and a few online forums talking about it. Apparently, the game would start with a personality quiz, which would place you into one of the main 3 Pikmin types. Then, you would play as a Pikmin trying to help a space explorer escape the planet. To do this, you would have to track down pellets on other websites to gain points for your team. It's unclear how this worked exactly, but it seemed to be a way for Nintendo of America to promote the Pikmin franchise, as internet users would find these pellets on random websites and be taken to the Pikmin site from there to explain what they had just found, and how the game worked if they wanted to make an account and join in on the scavenger hunt. It's unfortunate that no footage remains of this game because it sounds like it was really cool, but enough delay. After a pretty sizable marketing campaign, Pikmin 2 released in 2004. As always, I'll be referring to the original release of the game in North America, aka how the game played on GameCube. But the footage used in this video will be from the Nintendo Switch edition of the game running on a Nintendo Switch 2 in TV mode for the best quality and presentation. The discussion will mainly be focused on the original release of the game, but differences will be brought up as they are relevant, and trust me, they will be relevant. See, unlike Pikmin 1, Pikmin 2 has had a ton of changes over the years, most notably in its original release. See, while we will be looking at the English release, it's very important to note that Pikmin 2 initially released with 3 different versions. One for Japan, one for Europe, and one for North America. This was common practice at the time. In fact, even Pikmin 1 had this same release method as I mentioned previously. But while Pikmin 1 had minor changes, like the lengths of days or weight of ship parts, Pikmin 2 received drastic adjustments for each version, mainly in the design of the game's main collectible, treasures. We'll cover the treasures in a bit, but what's unique about them is that the treasures we all see in the game are human-made objects. Thus, Nintendo struck a ton of brand deals with companies to get treasures in the game that represented real-world objects. Duracell batteries, Jiffy's peanut butter, etc. But the brands that are represented in each version are different, so along with control differences in versions across consoles, we'll also have to discuss version differences across regions and how treasures differ. That being said, it's not just version differences that change the treasure designs. The Switch version merged all the versions into one, meaning no matter what language you play, you'll see the same treasures. And so, instead of choosing one version as a base, they decided to remove any and all product placement from the game, and any treasures that had variants before now have received new basic versions. Since I'm using footage from the Switch version, these are the variants we'll see. Now, Pikmin 2 has 201 treasures, with a bunch of them having regional variants. And I'm gonna be real with you guys, I will not be covering every treasure in the same detail that I covered every ship part. I just can't. But I will be bringing up certain iconic ones every now and again. Pikmin 2 to this day stands as one of my favorite games of all time. It did an incredible job at expanding the Pikmin series, universe, characters, and lore. Pikmin 2 is an amazing sequel. It perfected the concept of expanding a fictional world, adding on without jumping the shark, but still being exciting and unexpected. That being said, Pikmin 2 as a game is very love it or hate it. I feel like it's either your least favorite game in the series or your absolute favorite beyond a shadow of a doubt, and there's zero in between. For me personally, it's my least favorite. However, That doesn't mean I don't like the game. Far from it. It's still in my top 10 favorite games of all time. Being my least favorite Pikmin game is like being the least effective tequila. Doesn't mean that shit don't still get me giggling. Pikmin 2 perfected expansion. And in this retrospective, I aim to discuss everything it did to expand its franchise and cement itself as a timeless experience that Pikmin fans have continued to return to for decades. So let's waste no more time and finally talk about one of the best examples of the expansion of a fictional world in Pikmin 2. So, the basic setup of the sequel is a lot more lighthearted in nature compared to its predecessor, a theme we'll be seeing in droves when discussing the narrative of this entry in the series. I'm a little mixed on the tone of Pikmin 2. On the one hand, I adored the narrative of the first game because of its unique, somber tone. Pikmin 1 was a one-man story. It was lonely and unnerving, but also weirdly beautiful, which is why I gave the game such high praise in the story department, but unfortunately, Pikmin 2 departs pretty heavily from this style. More characters are thrown into the mix, which leads Olimar himself to have little to no dialogue as a whole. The game is a lot more jokey in nature, which to me is a little disappointing coming off the heels of the first game. However, on the other hand, this game does an amazing job with what it aims to accomplish. Pikmin 2 has some great jokes, and although Olimar is developed far less comparatively, it's perfectly fine in retrospect because of how much development is given to the new characters. Which we'll absolutely get to later. Don't worry about that, I have a lot to say. So there's pros and cons to this approach for sure. I'd say I prefer the tone of Pikmin 1 overall, but what Pikmin 2 accomplishes with its tone is still really neat, and I don't hold it against the game on an individual level. But enough of that side tangent, you'll quickly see what I mean in the analysis itself. The game opens with a quick cutscene recapping the events of Pikmin 1's true ending. Olimar crashes, he meets the Pikmin, he escapes. Then, the game gives us the exposition we need for this story. We get introduced to Olimar's company, Hukatate Freight, an intergalactic shipping company on his home planet that's pretty run down. Clearly a business which is only just barely staying afloat. Interestingly enough, we already have a retcon here. In a random voyage log entry in Pikmin 1, Olimar describes his boss as the head of the pilot union. I actually brought this up earlier during the Pikmin 1 discussion. Pikmin 2 introduces us to his boss, the president of Hukatate Freight, but there's no mention of any pilot union. I assume they just didn't have a name for Olimar's company picked out when they were making the first game, which led to this discrepancy. But no matter what, it's an interesting retcon nonetheless. The game shows us that in Olimar's absence, the company has ran into financial troubles. This ends the recap cutscene and transitions us into the first CGI cutscene of the game. And wow, does it look so much better than the cutscenes from the first game. Olimar's new model is so expressive, and we actually get to see him flying the dolphin. Look at him tapping his little thumb on the steering wheel. Text in the first game, along with its manual, heavily implied that Olimar usually puts his ship on autopilot, which is what led to his crash, but seeing him so attentive at the wheel here really shows some character growth. It's such a little detail that only appears on screen for less than 5 seconds, but I really appreciate its inclusion. Maybe I'm looking a little too much into it, but look at the video you're watching. What did you expect? Olimar lands on his home planet for the first time since the events of the first game, but instead of seeing his family, he's immediately bombarded by his company. Here we get introduced to 2 new characters, Olimar's boss and the president of Hukatate Freight, Shacho. And yes, that is his canon name, Nintendo Today confirmed it. The other character we meet here is Olimar's incompetent co-worker, Louie. The Luigi of the Pikmin franchise, so to speak. Louie is a fan-favorite character, and it's very easy to see why. I mean, come on, it's Louie. I say this with no hesitation in my voice, Louie is absolutely the second most well-written character in the franchise, very close behind Olimar, and for completely different reasons than his more refined counterpart, but again, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. For now, this cutscene lets us know that in Olimar's absence, the company has gone into debt after Louie failed to execute on an extremely important shipment of golden pick carrots. He says that a ravenous space bunny ate them during his expedition, which is an obvious lie and is played for jokes, but I believe there is evidence somewhere of space bunnies actually existing in-universe. I vaguely remember some sort of dialogue where the president mentions that he sent Louie on a route that had no space bunnies, so that this wouldn't happen. But I looked high and low for it, and I cannot find it anywhere, so I might just be crazy and be making everything up. Pikmin actually doesn't even exist. It's not a real franchise. I'm completely lying to you. The company immediately sells Olimar's ship to help pay off the debt and reveals that the rest of the debt is a whopping 10,100 Pokos, the currency used on Hockatate. Olimar, in shock, drops a large bottle cap he brought back for his son as a souvenir, and the company ship scans the item to determine it's actually worth 100 Pokos. To which the president exclaims, 100 Pokos? That's more than a year's salary. Now, Pikmin fans have tried to use this line to determine the real-world exchange rate of Pokos, with the wiki pointing out some major discrepancies in doing so. Since we have no way to know how Hockatations measure time, so a year might not be what we would classify as a year. And with the differing values of Pokos and items throughout the game, it's hard to get a concrete answer. But if we take the average yearly salary of an Amazon delivery driver, yes, I'm actually doing the math for this, we can equate 100 Pokos to roughly at least $35,000. Meaning that not only is this bottle cap or treasure worth that much, but in US dollars, we would be able to determine that the company is around $3.5 million in debt at least. And while we have no way of knowing how many carrots Louis was transporting, we can assume that each individual carrot was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars each. A comparable price to real estate, luxury cars, high-end personalized equipment, and much, much more that the average person would be lucky to be in possession of just one of. My point in all of this being, those carrots were worth a lot of money. Anyways, the president, now knowing about the copious amounts of treasure that must be on the planet, decides to send Olimar back with Louis to get more and hopefully pay off the company's debt. That's the setup for Pikmin 2's story. We'll talk about it more in depth later, but for now, let's take a look at Day 1. Day 1 opens with a crash landing. Louis falls out of the ship, and we get into the game. The ship starts talking to Olimar, scolding him for his bad piloting, which, yes, the main dialogue we'll be seeing in Pikmin 2 will be coming from this guy, the Hockatate Freight Company ship. He's a pretty funny character that's very iconic to the grand scheme of the franchise, but is he a replacement for Olimar's inner monologues? Not really, in my opinion. This is just a product of the game's different tone, which, as I said, is very hit or miss. I still prefer the style of Pikmin 1, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't love the ship's characterization. Maybe the tone isn't as serious, but this thing has some iconic lines nonetheless. In any case, we immediately come across local red Pikmin. The game instructs us to whistle them to our side, and now we have full control over the game. So let's take a look at how this game's control scheme differs from its predecessor. To not be redundant, I'll quickly say that the A, B, L, R, X, and Z buttons all do the exact same thing as before. Throw Pikmin or punch, whistle Pikmin, control camera, dismiss Pikmin, pretty self-explanatory, moving directly over from the first title. Both control sticks also do the same things as before. Use the left control stick to control your character and the cursor, and use the C stick to swarm Pikmin. All of this stuff was covered in the Pikmin 1 discussion, so I won't retread where I don't need to, but that doesn't mean we don't have a lot to discuss when it comes to the controls, because now the Y button is mapped to an integral feature of Pikmin 2. While the first game allowed you to pull up the map with Y, it'll now let you switch between captains. So yeah, Pikmin 2 allows you to take control of two different characters. Right now, this is Olimar and Louis. Pressing the Y button allows you to switch to the other character, allowing you to split up workload by having captains spread across the map. A very useful tool for multitasking. Olimar works the same as he did in the first game, and Louis is mechanically the same as Olimar, however, there are a few things different about him. His sound effects. His whistle and swarm actually sound different from Olimar's. Louis' whistle resembles a train whistle, and his swarm is played through a clarinet. It's a small change, but it's neat. Another little anecdote, when switching captains, they'll yell out their names. Now, as I said earlier, despite Pikmin 2 making a lot of changes from the series roots that don't sit well with certain people, it's little things like this that make this entry in the franchise one of, if not the most iconic game by a long shot. Nothing, and I mean nothing, no sound effect will ever beat the immense aura conveyed by these sound effects. If you haven't played Pikmin 2, or you haven't been a big part of the online Pikmin community, then these lines might not seem like anything special, but when I tell you this is some of the most iconic shit to come out of this franchise, I say that with zero hesitation. There's absolutely no vocal stim as satisfying to me as the funny little way that Olimar and Louie shout their names when you switch to them. It just sounds so goofy. Like, yeah, Louie, that's your name. Now, if Y is taken by switching captains, how do we pull up the map? Well, Nintendo decided to truncate the two separate pause screens into one. Pressing start will pull up the map, but by pressing the shoulder buttons we can cycle through a few different menus. The map is the exact same as the first game, albeit with a nice UI overhaul. But we can also cycle to the return to last save option that was originally assigned to start in the first game. We can also see the upgrade list, but for now this doesn't mean anything to us. Other than that, all the controls can be summed up by saying that, well, it's the exact same as Pikmin 1. Except for one key difference. The D-pad now has a use. You can use it to swap Pikmin types when you're holding them, a feature added to the re-releases of Pikmin 1, but was always a part of the second game. The D-pad can also do something else outside of when you're holding Pikmin, but we'll discuss that a bit later. We can move Louie over to find the red onion, giving us a proper introduction to the red Pikmin. We'll talk about them next, but for now, I'd like to take a look at the rest of the game's tutorial day. See, you can use Louie to grow your numbers and eventually crush this paper bag in between the two of them, which is a new mechanic introduced here in Pikmin 2. These bags block off certain paths, and they require a certain amount of Pikmin to be flattened, and thus open the path. In a sense, it's very similar to the box mechanic from Pikmin 1, which, fun fact, don't actually reappear in this entry. Yeah, cardboard boxes are nowhere to be seen in Pikmin 2. An odd choice considering the mechanic has remained a staple of every other game in the franchise since. In any case, the day concludes when we collect our first treasure, the Courage Reactor. Now, I said I wouldn't be covering each treasure in detail, but I'd like to make an exception for this one as a quick example of how version differences influence the presentation of the game. The Courage Reactor is a battery. Simple, right? Not at all. This treasure has 3 different versions. Ironically, in the North American and European versions of the game, the treasure appears as a Duracell branded battery, but in the Japanese version of the game, it appears as a High-Top branded battery, a real company in Japan. In the Switch version, all languages received this updated design that resembles a basic battery with no defining real-world product placement in sight. So, yeah, expect less detail moving forward. I just wanted to point out how the game has changed over time and regions. So with all the basics out of the way, let's get a little more in-depth on the foundation of Pikmin 2 as an experience, starting off with everyone's favorite topic, the Pikmin types. Starting off with Reds, the first type we find, these little guys haven't changed one bit from their previous incarnation. They retain the basic Pikmin trend of an immunity and an ability, that of course being fire and a 1.5 times damage multiplier, just like in the first game. That being said, Red Pikmin are a lot less useful in this entry compared to the previous title, mainly because they get outclassed by other types. For one thing, fire is a lot less deadly in Pikmin 2. The time it takes for a Pikmin to die from fire has been changed from less than a second to 5 seconds, meaning the Red's immunity is far less useful overall. But it gets even worse for Reds when you take a look at their damage, because while they do retain their multiplier, the extra damage becomes negligible due to a certain Pikmin type that easily outclasses them, but more on that later. Let's finish up discussing the old Pikmin types. Yellow Pikmin are the 4th type you get in the game, directly after you find the 2 brand new types we have yet to talk about. Yellow Pikmin got a complete overhaul. Bomb rocks can no longer be carried in this entry, instead they act as hazards, so while yellows keep their extra height, their bomb abilities are replaced with an immunity to keep them more in line with red Pikmin. Yellows are now immune to electricity, a brand new elemental hazard in Pikmin 2, and unlike fire and water, electricity instantly kills any Pikmin it touches aside from yellows, making them one of the most useful types in the game as they are immune to the only insta-kill hazard. Yellows went from being arguably one of the worst types to arguably one of the best. They received by far the most changes to their mechanics from the original 3, especially when we look at blue Pikmin. So, just like Reds, blue Pikmin received no changes. They are still only immune to water, and with even more types in this game's lineup, blues fall even further down the list of usefulness. Although I will say that Pikmin 2 uses these guys in some very interesting ways, which harps back to my original argument. Despite being the last type you get in the game, much like before, they are by far the worst, which is on purpose, as you're mainly meant to use them by themselves as a sort of hindrance. My thoughts remain the same, and we'll see how they are used in this entry a bit later, but for now, let's move on to the new Pikmin types. So the second type you receive in the game is a brand new Pikmin, the purple Pikmin. Both them and white Pikmin are unique in the fact that they don't have an onion. Instead, they must be grown with candy pop buds underground, which only allow you to convert a max of 5 Pikmin into a new color, making these new types pretty rare overall. Purples are different from your average Pikmin type, because they actually have 0 immunities. But, to make up for this, purple Pikmin have a whopping 3 abilities that make them by far the most useful type in the game. First of all, purples weigh 10 times more than every other Pikmin. When carrying objects, they count as 10 Pikmin, meaning one purple can carry any object less than or equal to 10 by themselves. This also opens the door for objects to weigh more than 100 Pikmin. Something we'll definitely see later. Purples also have a 2 times damage multiplier, being far better at combat than red Pikmin already, not even counting their third ability, the Slam. When throwing a purple Pikmin directly, they will slam onto the ground or enemy, dealing impact damage before the purple begins to attack. On top of that, these slams have a chance to stun. A 30% chance, which will stun any enemy for 5 whole seconds. All this to say, even just 10 purples thrown on the back of most enemies can instantly kill that enemy. I'm not joking. The impact damage plus 10 good chances to stun makes almost every situation impossible for the enemy to do anything in retaliation, rarely being able to shake the Pikmin off, let alone attack them. For most enemies, purples trivialize combat, at the expense of having no immunities and being ridiculously slow. A purple Pikmin with a leaf may as well be left behind because it will not be able to keep up with the player. A lot of times you'll have to stop every few feet to let it catch up and make sure it doesn't get too far away and just flat out leave the party. But trust me, that is a small price to pay for the sheer power purple Pikmin have. If used correctly, they can trivialize a ton of the game. When discussing enemies later on, you'll notice me saying a lot something along the lines of, here's how you're supposed to fight them, and then saying, but with 5 purple Pikmin they can be insta-killed. They are overpowered and absolutely worth the rarity. Which is something I can't exactly say about their counterpart, the white Pikmin. These are the third type you discover in the game and are just as rare as purples, albeit far less useful. White Pikmin do have an immunity, that being poison. Poison works exactly the same as fire and is used far less frequently. As for their ability, white Pikmin can see underground. They can dig up buried treasures, which is of course required for 100%, but isn't practical otherwise. You only really need 5 or so white Pikmin at any given moment. You can use them to deal with poison quickly, or find buried treasures when they need to, but otherwise they don't provide anything that any other Pikmin type can't do. Whites do have 2 other abilities which can be useful, but aren't anything special overall. They move far faster than the average Pikmin, the opposite of the purple Pikmin's hindrance. And when they are eaten by an enemy, they will deal damage to it via poison. But only if they're eaten. If they are crushed, lit on fire, drowned, blown up, electrocuted, thrown off a cliff, or die to sunset, then they will simply die like any other Pikmin type, even if they are directly killed by an enemy as opposed to a hazard. Plus, one white Pikmin won't deal too much damage. It's enough to kill small enemies like dwarf bulborbs, but is rarely enough to justify the sacrifice for any other kind of enemy. White Pikmin are required, but are pretty ineffective in most instances, although the increased carrying speed is very nice in a pinch, which does make them slightly better than blues in my eyes. Finally, we have the Bulbmin, the secret 6th type which can only be found in caves and cannot leave the cave with you. More on that later. Despite their limited uses, Bulbmin are extremely good. They have 0 abilities, no extra height, weight, or damage in sight, but they make up for that in being immune to every elemental hazard in the game, that being fire, poison, water, and electricity. In a sense, Bulbmin are the true counterpart to purples, with them having all the immunities but no abilities, and purples having no immunities but the most abilities out of any Pikmin type, as well as arguably the most useful abilities. As you may have noticed, Bulbmin are a little funny looking. They're a mix between Bulborbs and Pikmin. We'll talk about their importance lore-wise when discussing enemies later. For now, however, we're done talking about the Pikmin types. All in all, Pikmin 2 made some great adjustments. Yellow's got a sizable buff, and the new types work well with the already existing ones. Unfortunately, this means that the two types that received zero changes, Reds and Blues, are left to be some of the least useful in the game, which, after dominating in the previous entry, is understandable for Reds, but it is a bit sad for Blues, as they remain in last place. Overall, I think the type balancing of the first game was better, but that's in large part because there were only 3 types to choose from. If Yellows remained the same as they worked in Pikmin 1, and the only changes that they made were the added types, I think the balancing in this game would be all over the place and not fun overall. It would feel like the original 3 were pushed aside in favor of the new types, but that's really not the case with the adjustments that have been made. Every type still feels useful in some way. It's just, with so many types in the mix now, some are bound to be noticeably better than others, making the power gap between Pikmin types far more apparent as opposed to the previous entry. But while balancing Pikmin types is an important part of any Pikmin game, none of that matters if the mechanics surrounding them aren't solid, so let's take a look at Pikmin 2 and its mechanical differences from its predecessor, along with what it adds. So, first of all, the differences. Candy Pop Buds returned from the last game, but they have received a major overhaul. Instead of being an infinite source to rapidly change the type of any Pikmin that rarely appear, Candy Pop Buds are now a far more common commodity that wilt away after being used 5 times. As always, the color of the bud influences what Pikmin types it will create, so throwing any kind of Pikmin into a violet Candy Pop Bud will always produce purple Pikmin. After making 5 new purples, the flower will wilt away, with these being the only method of obtaining purples and whites. Queen Candy Pop Buds are another new addition. By throwing in 1 Pikmin, you'll be able to make 8 Pikmin of one type while in a cave, which otherwise won't let you create more Pikmin on the fly. It quickly swaps between the main 3 colors, so you can't use this to duplicate whites and purples, but they're still great to see, especially in the late game. Candy Pop Buds are an extremely useful mechanic, especially compared to their limited use in the previous entry. Elemental hazards have received a pretty big adjustment as well. Pikmin die to them far slower for one, but while fire works almost identical to how it did before, and poison is all but a copy of fire, water has received a small adjustment. There are still bodies of water like in the first game, but now certain enemies can also expel water, causing non-blue Pikmin to panic and run around until they either die or you call them back. Just like fire and poison, and, as I said before, electricity is an insta-kill. The engine of Pikmin 2 is slightly different from the first game as well. It's very similar, but fixes a ton of issues. Namely, the crushing glitch is now lost media, and Pikmin no longer trip over themselves when walking around. They can still get caught on the level design, but even that seems to happen far less than it did before. As for new mechanics, we have 2 major topics to discuss here. First of all, let's discuss the spray system. Sprays are like your power-ups in Pikmin 2. You can collect these berries throughout the map to gain more sprays. Red berries will get you Spicy Spray. Spicy Spray can be used by clicking up on the D-pad. It will power up your entire squad of Pikmin, increasing their speed and sometimes increasing their attack. I say sometimes because the way Spicy Spray changes a Pikmin's stats is actually extremely weird. Here in Pikmin 2, it automatically sets the speed of any Pikmin to a flower, meaning that for speed, there's actually no reason to ever use it on a group of flower Pikmin. The real bonus comes in when looking at attack, as while it actually won't increase the attack stat of Pikmin, it does make their attack speed double. This also applies to their speed when constructing bridges or breaking down gates. However, I kinda lied earlier. For yellow, blue, and white Pikmin, their speed gets set to flower, and their attack speed doubles. But for reds and purples, because of the way the spray is coded, it'll actually decrease their attack stat back down to a 1x multiplier. They still gain the extra attack speed, but for purple Pikmin, who already have a low attack speed to account for their 2x damage, Spicy Spray, by all accounts, actually nerfs them pretty heavily. Spicy Spray makes most Pikmin types far more competent in combat, but it's actually just better to use basic purples for combat and save Spicy Spray for carrying, building, or destroying. While Spicy Spray's attributes have changed constantly throughout the series, this weird tendency to have it nerf certain Pikmin types has never changed, as we'll see in later games. Makes me think it was intentional, which feels kind of evil considering the game just tells you that Pikmin get a power-up from the spray. It never actually specifies how it works. In fact, we wouldn't know all this information without modders, ROM hackers, and data miners digging into the foundation of the game. I don't know, it feels odd that Nintendo would intentionally have a power-up nerf some Pikmin without telling you. Bitter Spray is obtained through these purple berries. This will petrify any enemy it's used on, stunning them for a few seconds, allowing you to attack. When killed while petrified, enemies will often drop nectar and even more sprays, a way to get around collecting berries. These can also be found in eggs, along with base nectar. Weirdly enough, I believed for the longest time that Bitter Spray would petrify enemies at the expense of increasing the enemy's defense while they're affected. But this is actually not true. Quite the opposite, surprisingly. Almost every base enemy on the roster actually takes 50% more damage when petrified. The only enemies that have this defense increase are bosses, which makes sense considering I personally try to save my sprays for difficult fights like bosses, so of course this would be my perception. The only basic enemy that gets increased defense is the Toady Bloister, which is a weird little thing we'll talk about later. In any case, Bitter Spray is pretty useful overall. Those spray globs I just mentioned also have a fun little mechanic, albeit unintended. See, if you push one captain into the spray, they'll begin to collect it. If you touch it yourself, the game locks you into that collecting animation until it's done. But if you push your second captain into the spray while you still have control over your character, you can also touch the spray before the other character's animation is done, so you'll be able to collect 2 sprays. Using this trick pretty much trivializes the whole berry collecting process past the start of the game, since late game caves will give you an absurd amount of sprays. Speaking of caves, that's the other mechanic added in Pikmin 2, the cave system. Some love it, and others tolerate it. See, in each main area, there are the sub-areas called caves. These caves always have determined enemies, treasures, hazards, and floor counts, but the actual layout of each floor is always randomly generated, as a way of keeping the game feeling fresh, I suppose? Unfortunately, most of Pikmin 2 is spent in caves. That's where most treasures are, that's where you find purple and white Pikmin, that's where you see most of the boss fights, etc, etc, etc. Caves aren't bad per se, but they are very different. See, Pikmin 2 has no time limit. You can spend as many days as you want, but that's neither here nor there. You still need to be efficient and keep an eye on the clock to avoid losing Pikmin to sunset. In caves, this isn't an issue. Time pauses in caves. And when moving on to new floors of a cave or exiting the cave, you won't have to worry about gathering Pikmin. They will all automatically come with you besides Bulbmint. It removes a ton of the fun of Pikmin 1's day system. But caves do make up for this by being pretty difficult in the late game. Plus, you won't be able to grow extra Pikmin underground, so it becomes a battle of resource management rather than time management. Again, it's not inherently bad, it's just different. I still personally prefer the gameplay style of the first game, but I do like a lot of the things about the cave system. It allows for unique situations where you have far less Pikmin than you would like, and have to plan out what to do to actually complete any given floor. It's still strategy, and it's still Pikmin. It's mainly because of the cave system that I say that Pikmin 2 is either your least favorite or most favorite, because it all comes down to whether or not you enjoy the cave system over how the other games work, especially considering how Pikmin 4 would eventually rework the cave system to have it implemented more elegantly into the main Pikmin gameplay. But I digress. We'll discuss more in depth how caves change the gameplay when we get around to discussing specific caves. Speaking of which, it's about time we move on to the main event, the area discussion. Like before, we'll be analyzing each area in order, talking about some treasures, the enemies, the music, and the environment. That being said, once we discuss the entire overworld before moving on to the next area, we'll talk about each cave in the area. So, without further ado, let's kick off the area analysis with the first area of the game, and one of my favorite areas in the whole franchise. Oh, the Valley of Repose. What an underappreciated gem of an area. Don't get me wrong, people love this area, it's quite iconic, but I feel like it deserves so much more respect than it gets despite that. I mean, for one thing, this is the only entirely original area in Pikmin 2. As we'll soon see, the other 3 areas in the game are actually remixes of maps from Pikmin 1, and are canonically the same location. But we'll get to that whole fiasco in a bit. The Valley of Repose is a great area, and it's the first to truly utilize the abandoned Earth setting in all of its glory. What I mean by this is, when you look from the area from afar, you can see that the whole place is actually just a small strip of road, mostly obscured by snow. Speaking of snow, that's probably the reason I love this place so much. I've made it no secret in other videos just how much I adore winter-themed areas and games, and Pikmin 2 is no different in this respect. I have a bit of a snow bias. In fact, even outside of gaming, I've always adored the serenity of a good snow-covered landscape. You know, freshly after a storm, but before it all gets shoveled. Just a sheet of white reflecting the sun back at you. There's something beautiful about that to me. And in fiction, I think wintry landscapes, like we see in the Valley of Repose, just create that calming vibe that I always love to see. Speaking of calming vibes, the Valley of Repose is our first area, so naturally the environment surrounding our base is quite serene with not much danger to get in the way of exploration. Which, in my opinion, just adds to the calming vibe of the winter landscape, as this is often the place to go to regrow Pikmin and prepare for the next difficult encounter. Because as we'll soon see, Pikmin 2 does not remain this way for very long, even within the same area. This area is also home to a very popular fan theory. See, with every other area being a remix of a Pikmin 1 location, the Valley of Repose feels a bit out of place in a way. In fact, because of this, we actually revisit every area from the first game in Pikmin 2, except for the Forest Navel. But with that area being an underground cavern, a popular fan theory suggests that the Valley of Repose is actually above the Forest Navel, making it so we technically did revisit the area. The theory proposes that the navel is under the giant manhole in the middle of the map, and while there's not much evidence to back up the theory, I choose to believe it because I think it's a really cool idea. The area also has some stellar music, using a harp, synth handbells, and even sleigh bells to create the iconic winter vibe. Crash cymbals are introduced in the combat version of the track, but no matter what version you listen to, it's a serene melody that does a great job at portraying the vibe of the area. Here, take a listen. What a calming theme. If I ever have kids, this is gonna be their lullaby. Overall, the music in Pikmin 2 is actually really great. I'd say it's better than the first game overall, but I don't think it reaches the heights of that game's soundtrack either. A sentiment I hold for a lot of Pikmin 2 as an experience. Overall, it's bigger and better than the first game, but I feel like it fails to replicate the best parts of its predecessor. Tangent aside, let's take a look at the map's layout. The base can be found in the far south. Going even further south leads us to where Louie found the red onion on day 1. And that's it. The rest of the area's substance can be found by going north. This is actually an issue that's going to become quite common moving forward. Not the direction of the map per se, but the segmentation of it. Unfortunately, unlike Pikmin 1, which I feel integrated the onion discovery spots pretty organically into the level design, Pikmin 2 and beyond just can't seem to find a good balance. All the onions in this game are pretty out of the way, segmented to their own little area that, once you visit, you never really need to return to again. The red onion in the Valley of Repose is the worst offender of this, as after day 1, the entire bottom portion of the map becomes practically useless. It's unfortunate, really. Because of this little quirk of game design, most maps in Pikmin games from now on will have just a little section off to the side that feels out of place and inconsequential after your first visit to the area. Now, we discussed the Courage Reactor already, but moving north we can find the Utter Scrap, guarded by a Bulborb, and then the Emergence Cave directly beyond the first Bramble Gate. Everything else in this area requires blue Pikmin to access, so you're meant to come back later, but for consistency's sake, we'll talk about the area in its entirety right now. It's past this point that we find a new mechanic, a clog. Clogs are structures that blue Pikmin can destroy to drain the water in the area. I didn't feel like mentioning these things until now because they are really quite inconsequential. Past this bridge and lake, we find the rest of the map, where we'll be treated to the rest of the treasures. Nothing of note here, although the Unspeakable Wonder resembles Princess Peach's crown, so that's really cool. As for enemies, we've got quite a range of new and returning faces. The Burrowing Snagret, Dwarf Bulborb, Red Bulborb, Fiery Blowhog, Honeywisp, and Water Dumple all return from Pikmin 1 and act largely the same, although now are mostly trivialized by Purple Pikmin. Spotty Bulborbs did receive a name change here to be Red Bulborbs, mainly because of the new types of Bulborbs added in this entry, which we'll soon see. As for new enemies, we get to see the Armored Cannon Larva and Decorated Cannon Larva. prepubescent cannon beetles from the first game. Do cannon beetles return? Nope. They can be dealt with pretty easily. They just shoot rocks just like their boss variant, but don't have any specific weak spot to take advantage of. They can simply be hit anywhere on the body. The decorated cannon larva, while just looking like a recolor, actually acts quite a bit differently, with rocks that follow the player instead of just shooting in a straight direction. In short, they're really annoying from afar, but if you can get up close to them with purples, they don't stand a chance, as I'm sure you can imagine. Fun fact, these enemies actually have an extremely long death sound that the game cuts off after only a few seconds. But if you pause the game just after killing them, you'll hear the entire sound, which lasts for an uncomfortable amount of time. Armored cannon larva can also be dealt with pretty easily, because if you use a decorated cannon larva and lead its own rock to hit itself, it can deal massive damage to itself. Next up is the cloaking burrownet, which is a piercing enemy. It burrows in the ground and will pop out once you get close enough. It then uses its pincer on its face to attack and eat Pikmin. It has a hard shell protecting its backside, so to kill it, you'll have to face it head on. Oftentimes by swarming it and letting your Pikmin kill it before it can eat any of them. Or, alternatively, just use purple Pikmin. The fiery Bulblax is a new kind of grub dog. Sporting the name Bulblax usually indicates a tougher fight, as we'll see with the other two Bulblaxes in this game. The fiery Bulblax is simple. He sleeps just like a regular Bulborb, and just attacks a bit more ferociously. The big difference comes in when you take a look at the design of the enemy. Keen-eyed players may notice that this grub dog is actually pretty abnormal in the sense that it is literally on fucking fire. Naturally, red Pikmin are the play here. Or are they? See, if you lead the Bulblax into water, its flames will be extinguished, and in certain positions like this one in the Valley of Repose, where it is surrounded by water, blue Pikmin become a far better choice for dealing with this enemy. Although, rather annoyingly, the Bulblax will reignite the moment it steps back on land, which can lead to some frustrating situations. It's actually a pretty well-designed enemy that for once can't just be obliterated by purple Pikmin. Right? I mean, how would it? Purples don't have immunities. They can't handle fire or water, right? Surely purples can't land an attack on this enemy. Right? So to the surprise of absolutely no one, purples yet again trivialize this encounter. See, because of the way purple Pikmin's impact damage work, while they can't latch onto the body to attack without getting lit on fire, just touching the enemy deals damage, meaning if you just chuck like 30 purple Pikmin at this thing and then call them back once it's dead, you can save them from burning to death, no harm, no foul. Yes, this strategy is risky, and I wouldn't suggest first-time players try this out the gate, but it just goes to show how insanely broken purple Pikmin are. For the most part, unless it's actively covered in electricity, every single enemy in the game can be obliterated by purple Pikmin before they even have a chance to attack. You know, if you know what you're doing. A quick side note, but to take a quick break from the rapid-fire enemy analysis, I do just want to point out how amazing the fiery Bulblax is as a design. For an enemy covered in fire, it really looks the part. It looks like the creature's skin is actively melting. One eye is far bigger than the other, and it looks like a constant victim of its own body destroying itself. Olimar mentions in the Piclopedia that the creature's skin uses a spongy cell structure in order to diffuse the heat so as to not affect the internal organs. Like the Bulblax's body is constantly fighting back against itself, and from the enemy design, you can clearly see the toll that it takes on these guys. It's really great world building, and is just one of the first of many examples of how Pikmin 2 does an immaculate job at expanding the concepts of the previous game and making a real living and breathing ecosystem out of it. Metites are interesting. They don't actually attack Pikmin, they just cause fear, a new status introduced in Pikmin 2. Fear makes Pikmin act similarly to when they're on fire or poison. They just run around until they get whistled back, but unlike other hazards, this fear status can't get them killed, but it will scatter your troops a bit. Metites are always found in random packs, and can be killed by any means of attack. However, the most effective is using one purple Pikmin to slay in the ground, and kill them all instantly. They'll drop nectar and sprays. More of an enemy meant to help with grinding, rather than, well, an actual enemy. The watery blowhog is exactly what it sounds like. It's a slight recolor of the fiery blowhog that shoots out water instead of fire. Take every strategy for the first one and just apply it to blue Pikmin instead of reds. Although, as with everything in this game, fiery and watery blowhogs can be taken out in seconds with just a few purple Pikmin. Interestingly enough, Olimar says in his notes that this blowhog is actually a subspecies of the fiery blowhog that lacks the correct genes to ignite the chemicals it produces, and thus just expels non-flammable liquid. He also mentions that apparently the watery blowhog's genes are highly dominant for such a recent mutation in the population. So he mentions that the species is rapidly growing, which it's funny that he says that considering how underutilized they are in Pikmin 3. The Withering Blowhog works exactly like its puffy counterpart, but it's slightly smaller and doesn't just blow away Pikmin, it reverts them back to a leaf, completely getting rid of their flowers. So yeah, don't let one of these little shits get a good shot on your entire team because it's a bitch to deal with. So that's the Valley of Repose. It's a small area, but very calming with a few difficult encounters to really easy win to the Pikmin 2 experience. But hold on, we're not done with this place yet. We still got 3 whole caves to cover. The Emergence Cave is the first cave in the game, and it's pretty easy, all things considered. It has 2 sublevels and 3 treasures, and is the first place you find purple Pikmin. It's the tutorial cave, so it's really nothing special, but it does introduce us to one new enemy, the Snow Bulborb, a variant of the Dwarf Bulborb made for winter settings. Why they decided to put these guys in a few winter-themed caves and not in the overworld of the Valley of Repose is a question that gets a big fat shoulder roll from me. They work pretty much exactly like regular Dwarf Bulborbs, but even by those standards, they're pretty shockingly weak. They die in one direct hit, just like the Dwarf Bulborbs, but their HP is so substantially low that even just swarming these guys kills them pretty much instantly, at least notably faster than other Dwarf Bulborb. On the first sublevel, we find the Quenching Emblem and the Citrus Lump. Nothing crazy here, however, on the second sublevel, we find our first upgrade treasure, the Spherical Atlas. See, most caves have a final treasure which grants the player an upgrade of some kind. We'll be taking a deeper look at these upgrades as we go. This first upgrade grants us access to the second area, the Awakening Wood, and after exiting the cave, the day will automatically end and you'll be encouraged to head over there to find the first real boss and discover White Pikmin, and blah blah blah. Then you're supposed to come back to the Valley of Repose later to do the area's other 2 caves, but we're gonna cover one area at a time. Anyways, other than the Spherical Atlas, sublevel 2 is our introduction Purple Pikmin, but we already talked about those guys, and good God are we gonna be talking about them more later. So let's get off of that topic while we can still move out of the Emergence Cave and move on to our next little adventure. One I'm sure will be just as easy and just as simple. With the next cave, the Subterranean Complex. Oh, so it's already begun, hasn't it? So earlier I mentioned that Pikmin 2 is commonly considered the hardest game in the series, but why is that? Is it the level design, the combat, the enemies, aggressive, intense game design, Viagra? What makes this game so hard? Well, it's a combination of a ton of factors for sure. But overall, I think everything that makes this game so difficult can be rolled up nicely with one little something that I like to call the bullshit factor. See, bullshit factor is the factor of bullshit in any given case. What constitutes as bullshit? What about falling rocks, falling bombs, falling enemies, enemies that can revive, hazards that specifically only follow from the sky when Pikmin are carrying something, whatever the hell this is, and much, much, much more. And the Subterranean Complex is the best first example to show you exactly what I mean. The Subterranean Complex is a cave with 9 sublevels and 16 treasures. It also has one of the highest concentration of candy pop buds in the game, making it a great place to grind purple Pikmin. Let's go level by level and see just how awful this place actually is. The first floor isn't horrible, it's just 2 treasures and a few enemies. It's here that we get introduced to 2 new enemies, the Hairy Bulborb and the Bumbling Snitchbug. Hairy Bulborbs are much like Snow Bulborbs, just the adult version of them. And by that I mean they act exactly like regular Bulborbs, just with far lower HP. Pretty easy to take out with purples. Interestingly enough, the hair on the Hairy Bulborbs will fall off instantly upon being attacked, which is described to be a defense mechanism in the lore. But it's weird because, like, the hair is exactly what protects them against the cold climates they live in. So I don't know what we're doing here. Evolution was clearly a bitch to this thing. The Bumbling Snitchbug acts just like the Swooping Snitchbug, except it tries to pick up captains. If it picks you up, you can shake the control stick rapidly to release its grip, or you could just switch to the other captain and take it down that way. If it picks up both captains, then yeah, you'll have to get it to release you. This guy isn't horrible to deal with, but they just love to put it in rooms with a bunch of other crazy enemies to mess with you and disperse your Pikmin. I hate bumbling snitch bugs. I really do. Like, I don't think you guys fully grasp what I'm saying here. I hate these things. Moving on to other flying bugs with one of my favorite enemy designs, the careening dirigibug. This guy appears on floor 2 and is an annoying little bastard that most people hate with all their heart, but I love this thing. I just think they're neat. Careening dirigibugs fly around with balloons and can produce bomb rocks from their mouth. They'll use these bombs to attack Pikmin, which can be seriously deadly if you aren't careful, but since bomb rocks take a bit to explode, you can safely deal some damage and even time it so that the bug falls into the ground and gets hit by its own bomb. Be careful though. Purple Pikmin will instantly explode bomb rocks when landing a direct hit on them, so they're a bit dangerous to use here. They still wipe the floor with dirigibugs, but I appreciate the risk and reward game design here. As with the other flying bugs in this game, this guy is used around other enemies to mess with you. But you can also use these guys to drop bombs on other enemies and kill them without putting Pikmin in harm's way. Which is, of course, not a problem in caves since time is frozen anyway, and you can take as long as you want to deal with the floor. I like these guys. I really like them. Sublevel 3 doesn't have much to discuss, and Sublevel 4 is a rest floor with 3 ivory candy pop buds to grind up some white Pikmin if you need to. Sublevel 5, however, has 24 bomb rocks that drop from the ceiling when you try to carry back treasure. But luckily, there aren't any enemies aside from, 8 volatile dweevils. Volatile dweevils are the first type of dweevils we're looking at, ironically. Just another issue with the structure of going one area at a time, but oh well, it's too late now. Oh god, I just realized how annoying it's gonna be to edit the footage, considering the structure of Pikmin 2 makes it virtually impossible to do this whole area in one go. All the footage of this area is gonna be hours apart. Oh god, that's gonna be really annoying. Hey, future me editing this video, put up on screen how annoying the editing has been so far. Okay, thanks, future me. Back to the editing dungeon with you. So, the volatile dweevil is one of many dweevils in the game. See, dweevils will normally run around looking for objects that can be carried and then take those objects to hide under as camouflage. It's very neat behavior, and we'll talk about them a bit more once we reach the other dweevils. But for now, volatile dweevers are a bit different from the others, mainly because they keep blowing up. Yeah, so volatile dweevils will spawn with an object already on their head, that being an active bomb rock. Once they spot you, they'll follow you and your Pikmin until the timer runs out, and they explode. For all intents and purposes, these are walking bombs, as if the ones falling from the sky weren't enough. Do you see what I mean about the bullshit factor now? Some of these caves, man, they're just... like, I don't even know what they were thinking with this design. Sublevel 6 gives us yet another taste of explosions and spiders, but not at the same time. No, this level has a few dirigibugs and some new dweevils. The fiery and munge dweevils. Like I said before, these guys will walk around and pick up treasures or corpses, or whatever can be carried. Attacking them with a disguise proves futile, but after enough hits, the disguise will fall off and you can kill them pretty quickly. The best strategy for any dweevil is, you guessed it, purple Pikmin. Regular dweevils attack by shaking Pikmin off onto the floor and then expelling an elemental hazard around them. The munge dweevil is easy to spot as it's bright purple. This one will use poison, so you could use the safe strategy and use white Pikmin to take it down, or you could quick-scope the thing with a purple Pikmin. Fiery dweevils are red and spew exactly what you think they do. Again, use reds or just throw a purple. Spawning close to these little spiders are anode beetles, our first electrical enemy, making yellow Pikmin a very safe choice for these guys. They can't be attacked normally. You'll have to land a direct hit on their back to flip them over and start dealing damage for a bit before they eventually roll back around. Luckily, they actually can attack on their own, so a lone anode beetle can be rolled by a few purples. But when multiple are grouped up, they can connect with each other to form a big line of electricity between them, making big groups of them extremely deadly for pretty much all but yellow Pikmin. Although, if you notice them charging up like they're about to form a connection, just knocking one on its back cancels the attack. They're pretty pathetic, all things considered. But just like with Pikmin, there's strength in numbers, and with electricity being as deadly as it is, it's best to be cautious around these guys. I really like the design of anode beetles. The way they form a mini electrical circuit and walk around in groups, it just feels so in line with the world of Pikmin. I really love it. This floor isn't horrible, but with dweevils taking your treasure, dirigibugs dropping bombs, and a group of anode beetles just waiting to catch you off guard, it can be seriously challenging when ill-prepared for the floor. but after 5 sublevels of whatever the hell that was, it's a nice change of pace. Sublevel 7 wants you dead. It's a bloodbath. We got volatile dweevils roaming around, Dirigibugs ready to drop on you, and 25 preset bombs to drop into a whole squad of Pikmin. Not just that, but we have to deal with our first roaming enemy of the game, the Gatling Groink. Pikmin 2 has 2 roaming enemies. This is the first we'll be discussing. This one, the Gatling Groink, uses the explosion hazard and shoots any Pikmin or captain in sight. These guys will either stay on a pedestal, or they'll walk around trying to find you. And this floor, wouldn't you know it, has 2 of them. One stationary and one roaming. Groinks have a weak spot on their back and a protective shield in front. Luckily, they shoot from the front, so if you get it to try and shoot, and you just maneuver your way to the back, you'll be able to get some damage in and hopefully kill it before it just shoots the ground and kills everything anyway. Purples are of course great for these guys, but a lot of stationary Groinks are so high up that the only way to really get to them is to use yellows, which, as you can imagine, isn't ideal. Not only that, but roaming enemies in Pikmin 2 have a unique feature that's exclusive to this game. That being, they can come back to life. When you kill a Groink, it won't die. Instead, its health bar will reappear above its head and slowly start to regenerate. You'll need to have Pikmin carry it back to the onion or the ship to get rid of the body before it gets back up. These guys will grant you a ton of Pikmin in the overworld, but remember that onions won't follow you into caves, so for almost every Groink in this game, you won't exactly be reaping much of a reward. Now, as annoying as they are, can I be honest and say that I really like Gatling Groinks? I mean, first of all, they use the explosion hazard with a unique attack that isn't just dropping a bomb. That's really cool, and the rush to get them back to the ship before they revive is always tense, but really cool to strategize. And I'm a sucker for roaming enemies. I'm sorry, man, just spawning into a floor and doing a whole regular Pikmin 2 thing of scoping the place out and forming a plan, only to see a Groink running Mach 10 towards your base, creates such a feeling of panic that really gets you moving like nothing else. I love Groinks, they're great. Sublevel 8 is another rest floor, and one of the best ones in the game. With 2 Queen Candy Pop Buds and 3 Violet Candy Pop Buds, you basically get 15 free purple Pikmin. This is the cave to grind out purples in the late game for when you need them. But there's not much else to this floor, so moving on to sublevel 9, we finally got our first real boss fight. Before anything, I want to talk about the boss music, since this is our first real instance of it. The boss music in this game is so great. It starts with a bombastic trumpet, which kicks into a mellowed out melody. The theme is dynamic as well. It continues to be small and understated until the boss attacks, and depending on how big the attack is, the music will change and turn. I swear, the jingle that kicks in with boss attacks will forever be cemented in my head. It's a great theme, and it suits this first boss fight quite well, all things considered. The boss at this cave is the Man at Legs, a mechanical arachnorb that does not use its feet to attack. It simply waddles around the arena frantically before coming to a screeching halt to open its abdomen and reveal an actual machine gun. So unlike every arachnorb in the series, the Man at Legs does not use crushing as a hazard. It instead uses explosions, shooting rapidly at any Pikmin it can find. Luckily, there's hiding spots around the arena, but be careful, because even being a second too late to cover can leave you vulnerable to an onslaught of explosions. At best, killing a few Pikmin, and at worst, stun-locking your captain, leaving every Pikmin in your squad to die. Luckily, for as scary as it sounds, the Man at Legs can be a simple fight if you know what you're doing. Yellow Pikmin will be able to reach it far easier, and since Spicy Spray actually buffs yellow Pikmin by increasing their attack speed and keeping their attack stat the same, this is a great opportunity to use a spray to pretty easily take the boss down. I adore the Man at Legs. It has an amazing design, an amazing boss fight, some great lore implications, and above all, it's just cool. Like, even when the boss dies, he goes out in style. Look at that explosion. You can't tell me that isn't tough. The boss drops our next upgrade, the Stellar Orb, a light bulb which increases the visibility of caves. Not a great power-up, I can't lie, but it's nice to have for certain caves in the future. Although I will say that overall, it pales in comparison to the other upgrades. Wow, that took a while, huh? Don't worry though, the more caves we discuss, the less I'll have to talk about. We just gotta cover new enemies and mechanics as they pop up. And for as weirdly out of order as the subterranean complex ended up being, I will say that it was nice to get it out of the way. It let me talk about caves as a whole and what they represent for the gameplay experience of Pikmin 2 in total. Hopefully the last cave of Valley of Repose won't be too horrible to go over. Oh no. Okay, so, the Frontier Cavern has a lot. It's a pretty late game cave, all things considered, but looking through it, my big takeaway here is that every enemy in this cave that we haven't discussed yet will be discussed later through caves that almost all players will end up playing through first. Even the boss of this cave is a rematch, and it wouldn't feel right to talk about the rematch before talking about the actual original fight. So I will go over the Frontier Cavern here, but I'll leave out discussion of new enemies and bring them up later when they would normally be introduced to the player. Also, when I get to the boss later, I'll talk about what the rematch is like in this cave. I want to keep things moving along and not put too much focus on this first area to the point that discussions of later areas feel repetitive and unneeded. Plus, we still haven't discussed some of the earliest caves in the game, so the tonal whiplash from an in-depth look at all of this to acting like we're at the start of the game again wouldn't sit right with me. In any case, the Frontier Cavern is a cave with 8 sublevels and has 15 treasures. It's a Christmas-themed cave with a ton of snow. Treasures that resemble holiday decorations, hairy bulborbs, the works. This cave does have bulbmen. In fact, it's one of only 3 caves in the entire game with bulbmen. Overall, this cave is pretty good, but also really quite challenging. It's actually a favorite of mine despite how little I have to say about it outside of all the new enemies it contains, which, again, the player would have likely seen by now. What I will say, though, is that surprisingly the middle of the cave gives the player a random upgrade, the Rocket Punch, which powers up every third punch the captain throws. Actually pretty good for dangerous caves. It lets the player kill enemies themselves without putting Pikmin in danger. The boss of the cave is a rematch against the Empress Bullblacks. We'll discuss her more in the Awakening Wood, but for now what you need to know is that she drops the Repugnant Appendage, which grants us the upgrade Rush Boots. Rush Boots will make our captain slightly faster, which is good for speeding through caves with small groups of Pikmin, but not so great for large groups with leaf Pikmin in them, since it becomes really easy for them to get left behind simply because of the faster walking speed. Despite the weird way I had to go about discussing this area, overall, I love the Valley of Repose. I'm a sucker for winter-themed areas, and I love the design of this one. It may just be a little too linear for my taste, unfortunately, but luckily this isn't a trend we'll see too much of in the overworld areas of Pikmin 2, as the rest of the areas are really quite expansive. Too bad most of the player's time will be spent in the caves anyway. Well, whatever. With the first area down, it's only natural we take a peek at yet another fan favorite, the... Oh, the Awakening Wood, a remix of the Forest of Hope that honestly doesn't quite reach the heights of its previous incarnation, but it's still a pretty solid area in its own right. Obligatory dick joke aside, the Awakening Wood is yet another great area. Like I said, it's a remix of the Forest of Hope, as you can clearly see from the layout, but I do believe that it does enough to distance itself and find its own identity. Speaking of identity, now would be a good time to mention that the areas of Pikmin 2 sort of have a theming going on. You see, with this game having only 4 areas, the smallest amount in the whole franchise, Pikmin 2 tries to make each area stand out by theming them after a different season. The Valley of Repose was obviously winter, and the Awakening Wood takes its inspiration from spring. This area is covered in cherry blossoms and beautiful blooming flowers. It also has readily available burgeoning spiderworts for spray grinding, adding more to the theme of spring. It's such a beautiful area, and it's honestly quite difficult to see the resemblance to the Forest of Hope at first, since your base is a bit more south in the open area where the Eternal Fuel Dynamo originally was. The music here is also stellar as usual. It's upbeat and vibrant, like you're constantly ready for adventure, but it's also dynamic in the sense that, while the melody normally comes from a trumpet and a French horn during exploration, the melody shifts to an enthusiastic piccolo whenever you find treasure. Here, take a listen. As with all area themes, we also have a music box sunset theme and a combat theme. All versions of the theme are quite excellent in their own right. Speaking of theme variations, now would be a good time to mention that Louis actually has his own version of every single area theme in the game. Nothing about the instruments change, it's just the rhythm of the track. The rhythm changes depending on what character you're playing as. Olimar's theme remains in a standard time signature, but when playing as Louis, you'll notice that the theme kicks into swing rhythm. For non-music heads, swing rhythm is a style mainly used in jazz or blues music in order to give the song a sort of lazy bounce. This is done by using uneven triplet-based eighth notes to hold the first note longer than the second. It gives the whole track a sort of unpredictability. despite being completely predictable. All of this explanation is to say that there's absolutely a reason they decided to give Louis this pattern. I mean, it's Louis. He's unpredictable, seemingly unreliable, maybe just a little lazy and aloof, and he's quite the mystery, especially in this game. That being said, there's a lot more to Louis than meets the eye, but we'll cover all that later. For now, let's take a peek at the Awakening Woods layout. To the south of the base, we got a few treasures in a long path leading down to where the Snagrets were in the first game. Nothing crazy, although we do have a cave in this section. Going to where the base was in the first game, we can find some burgeoning spiderworts. Going past them leads us to a split path in the back of the map. Although this time, where the extraordinary bolt once was, we have a cave and a poison gate blocking us from getting to where the yellow onion was. Speaking of which, replacing the yellow onion is a new treasure, the geographic projection, the other half of the full globe, which unlocks us the third area, but more on that later. It's worth mentioning that the ship all but confirms we're on Earth, as in its dialogue, it mentions how the globe represents the planet we're on, as if all the man-made objects weren't enough, but, you know, lay it on heavy, I suppose. Up where the cannon beetle once was, there's an electric gate blocking our way to the blue onion. So even though this is the second area, we still need to find yellows in Area 3 before we can return here and get the blues as our final Pikmin type, which I always thought was a really neat decision. It lends itself to the open nature of Pikmin 2, especially once you have all 5 types. Because of this decision, however, you can actually only have 95 Pikmin out at once in the Awakening Wood at first, since there are 5 blue Pikmin by the onion that aren't yours yet. I never minded this, it's not a huge deal to be down a measly 5 Pikmin, especially in the early game, and it tips you off to the idea that there might be other Pikmin to come back for. To the right of the split path, we have a weight puzzle. Using both our captains, we can weigh down one side to push one captain up to find a treasure, and some bitter berries, as well as the entrance to yet another cave. The weight puzzle itself is also directly next to another cave, so that makes 4 in total. Overall, the layout does quite a bit to differentiate itself from the Forest of Hope, and I quite like the vibes of the Awakening Wood for being very early game friendly. This feels more like the starting area than the Valley of Repose did, but I digress. Enemy-wise, we have quite a few familiar faces. The burrowing Snagret appears where it did in the first game, red bulborbs, dwarf bulborbs, female sheargrubs, male sheargrubs, honeywisps, flint beetles, walpoles, and wallyhops all return from Pikmin 1. And cloaking Burrownit also show up here like they did in the Valley of Repose. As for new enemies, first up is the Creeping Chrysanthemum, one of my personal favorites. It disguises itself exactly like the flowers around the area, but you can tell when a flower is actually a creeping chrysanthemum in disguise by looking in the middle of the petals to see if there's an eye there instead. Watch out for blinking to make sure. When approaching the flower, the enemy will emerge from the ground and attack your Pikmin. If it fails to eat any, it'll fall and roll over before shaking Pikmin off. These guys have a pretty enormous hitbox, all things considered, so purples can make swift work of them. The iridescent glint beetle works similarly to the flint beetle, although it has a higher chance of dropping sprays and can potentially contain treasure sometimes. They're a bit more slippery though, so you gotta be precise. Speaking of which, the flint beetles have also changed a bit, now dropping sprays instead of 5 pellets. Both beetles drop nectar underground instead of pellets. The ravenous whisker pillar is a little piece of shit. It'll emerge from the ground whenever you're not around and eat all the berries off a burgeoning spiderwort. And when you try to attack it, it'll just run away. They can attack themselves, but they're the bane of my existence. Also, whenever you carry their corpse, they squirm and squeal as if they're still alive. In fact, after killing them, just like roaming enemies, they won't show a ghost. So they're probably still alive, which is disgusting to think about. Finally, we have unmarked spectralids, little butterflies that won't attack but can produce nectar or spray depending on their color. They're commonly found on rest floors. Alright, it's about that time again. Let's take a peek at the caves in the Awakening Wood and see if they're any better than the valley. First up is the Hole of Beasts, a pretty good starting cave all things considered. This cave has 5 floors and 6 treasures. Nothing crazy, but a good step up from the Emergence Cave. I will say, for as insane as late game Pikmin 2 gets, the game does an immaculate job at easing you into it. Caves don't go from 0 to 100, there's a lot of in between, which is nice. The first floor is nothing special, just some sheer grubs and a single treasure. This one is the Stone of Glory. It's the D-pad on an NES controller, which I always thought was really cute, especially for an early game treasure. Sublevel 2 is already a rest floor. You're able to get 10 more purple Pikmin here, which will be vital for opening up the rest of the map, as the next cave we need to get to is locked behind a paper bag weighing over 200 Pikmin. Funnily enough, this floor has no treasures. Sublevel 3 is a tutorial for Red Pikmin's fire immunity. There are only 2 treasures here, and no enemies to be seen, just a ton of fire geysers. Sublevel 4 is simple. You just gotta fight a Bulborb and collect 2 treasures, and you'll be on your way. There's also another Violet Candy Pop Bud here to grant you an additional 5 purples. Sublevel 5 is the final floor, and the boss floor. This cave's boss is the Empress Bulblax, the first boss fight in the game actually. The Empress Bulblax is obviously a play on the Emperor Bulblax from the first game, although she looks quite a bit different. She's a giant worm-looking Bulborb which will roll around and crush Pikmin. Best way to deal with her is to throw purples on her face and call them back right before she starts to roll. You can tell when she's about to roll from her shaking animation. This is a simple boss, but she actually does get 2 rematches in later caves, one of which being in the Frontier Cavern, so let's actually talk about that now. She works exactly the same as before, although she does have one more tool up her sleeve. Her other form of attacking, the Miracle of Childbirth. So yes, this is as disgusting as it sounds. The Empress, during her rematches, will actively give birth during the battle. Her, spot to, release babies is located on her backside. She'll constantly and consistently spew out a brand new enemy, the Bulborb larva. These guys are the weakest enemy in the game, being literal newborns. They have 1 HP and die after a single hit. A punch, a slam, any basic attack, they die instantly. But they're really fast, not just in movement, but in chewing speed too. If one grabs a hold of a Pikmin, say goodbye, because despite how easy they are to kill, they don't have a long chewing animation, so they can kill Pikmin rapidly with no chance of saving them. Bulborb larvae are best dealt with by captains. Dismiss your Pikmin and send one captain over to the back of the boss to punch all the larvae before they can start to crawl towards the front. This leaves your Pikmin with no chance to be picked off. No pun intended. Luckily, when the Empress is rolling, she'll stop producing more larvae, and any larvae that began to crawl towards the front can be killed by crushing. So luckily, as long as you take them all out at the start of the fight, you'll only have to switch to the second captain every so often to keep them all at bay. It's simple once you figure out this strategy. Here's a fun fact, the Empress is the only boss in the game which is required to fight 3 different times for 100%. Most bosses have only 1 appearance, but quite a few have a rematch. The Empress, however, is the only one to receive 2 different rematches, both of which having a treasure. There is one other boss which has a total of 3 appearances in Pikmin 2, but one of those appearances is its initial fight, the second is a rematch, and the third is a random overworld appearance that does not contain a treasure, so it's surprisingly not required, making the Empress the most frequently used boss in the game unless you count the burrowing Snagret. But that's more of a boss-like basic enemy, as it's only used as a boss fight once, and is then placed in other areas like a regular enemy, so maybe you could consider this to be the most used boss, but that's besides the point. In any case, this Empress does not produce any Bulborb larvae, so no need to worry about that. It'll drop the prototype detector, another upgrade treasure. This one gives us the treasure gauge, a little meter that gets displayed at the bottom right-hand corner of the UI. It'll start to beep when near a treasure, and will go completely gray if you've collected all the treasures in an area or sublevel. Is it useful? Yeah, probably one of the best upgrades in the game, damn near essential even. It makes sense that it's the second one you get. Is it also annoying as hell? Yes, also yes. This upgrade gets clowned on a lot for how annoying the beeping sound is, and yeah, I see why. The more you play Pikmin 2, the more you learn to drown the sound out, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't still get on my nerves from time to time. Next up, past the paper bag, we have the White Flower Garden, the cave where we first discover White Pikmin. It has 5 floors and 7 treasures, and is pretty much a tutorial for White Pikmin. The first 2 sublevels are entirely uninteresting. I'm not wasting my time talking about them, because there's really nothing to say. Third sublevel, however, has 3 ivory candy pop buds, giving us access to 15 White Pikmin. It also has the game's first buried treasure, showing off White Pikmin's digging ability. Fun fact, Pikmin's attack stat directly determines their digging stat in this game. Slight adjustments are made later, but for the most part, this is how digging works for the rest of the series. So while yes, white Pikmin are the only ones who can dig underground, once the part is slightly visible, other Pikmin types can join in, with purples being 2 times as effective as the other types, and reds being 1.5 times as effective. Sublevel 4 introduces us to the poison hazard, and how white Pikmin can deal with it. The cave then ends on sublevel 5 with a boss fight against the burrowing Snagret, the only boss enemy in the game which also appears as a regular enemy in the exact same form. There is one other boss enemy which reappears in a less powerful form as a regular enemy, but that's about it. All the other bosses are just bosses. In any case, this is meant to show off white Pikmin being poisonous. Most players will first see an enemy be damaged after eating a white Pikmin during this exact fight, but obviously it's entirely possible and flat out easy to beat a Snagret deathless. The Snagret will drop the 5-man knapsack, which gives us the upgrade, knapsack. This upgrade allows us to lie down just like in Pikmin 1. It's just as impractical and useless here as it was there. At least for most regular gameplay, because just like Pikmin 1, the lying down mechanic can be used to exploit a ton of glitches. I'm not going to cover them in this video, but if you're interested, I would highly suggest taking a peek at the Pikmin 2 speedrunning community. There's a lot of fun tech that you can do with this upgrade. After the White Flower Garden, we can use white Pikmin to break down the Poison Gate and get the geographic projection, to move on to the third area. We'll need to come back to the Awakening Wood later with yellow Pikmin to unlock blues, then the rest will be available. So let's take a look at the other 2 caves, which are meant to be completed with all 5 Pikmin types. The next cave on the list is the Bulblax Kingdom, one of my personal favorite of the mid-game caves. Not too hard, but also a really nice challenge overall. A good gear up to the torture yet to come. This is a cave with 7 floors and 10 treasures. Up first, with sublevel 1, we got a pretty easy floor here that introduces 2 new enemies, the Orange Bulborb and the Dwarf Orange Bulborb, our final basic grub dog of the game. Now, while they act pretty much exactly the same to red Bulborbs, these guys do stand out a bit more than their hairy counterparts, because while hairy Bulborbs are literally just red Bulborbs with less HP, orange Bulborbs have a slightly unique mechanic. You see, lore-wise, orange Bulborbs are known to be light sleepers, and so in gameplay they wake up far easier than other grub dogs. How is this done? Well, while other Bulborbs will only wake up if they are touched or attacked directly, orange Bulborbs have a sizable radius around them that when a Pikmin or Captain enters it, they will immediately wake up, making it hard to get the drop on these guys since they almost always will be awake before a Pikmin can land an attack. That being said, purple Pikmin still exist. Screw unique mechanics and fun game design. Go kill that thing before it even spawns in. Dwarf orange Bulborbs are similar. They act like dwarf Bulborbs, but they'll just notice you from further away. The next few sublevels aren't too special, just some treasures and enemies we've already seen, although sublevel 3 does have this treasure called the Olimarnite Shell, which I find neat because, like, why did they name it that? They named a fossil after Olimar just because. Sublevel 4 shows us the return of the basic Wallyhop. Not much to say there, but welcome back, old friend. And nothing much else happens until sublevel 7, and the boss fight. This cave's boss is the Emperor Bulblax. Yes, you heard me correctly, the Emperor Bulblax is back. The final boss of Pikmin 1. Easily the most difficult fight in that game, and he's just a regular boss now, so naturally this is gonna be pretty tough. It's already dead. Yeah, so the Emperor is an absolute joke in this game. It gets packed in by purple Pikmin to a frankly alarming degree. I mean, without Bomb Rock to stun it, a nerf was necessary, but good lord how the mighty have fallen. The Emperor actually returns later, just much smaller and with even less health as a regular enemy. It's pathetic. It's a huge joke in the Pikmin fandom that the Emperor Bulblax is a complete fraud, mainly because of its Pikmin 2 incarnation. Anyways, funnily enough, directly after the boss, we still have more to do on this floor. We get the Forged Courage from the Emperor, which gives us the upgrade Scorch Guard. This allows our captains to be immune to fire, and this upgrade is put to use instantly. The next room contains a ton of fire geysers and a pool of water. Ironically, the cave entrance says that this cave has no water in it, but what this actually means is that you don't need to deal with any water hazards. Blue Pikmin are not required in order to get this last treasure. See, if you throw reds up on this ledge, you can walk through the water alone and up this ramp of fire geysers with your new immunity to get your reds back and have them carry the treasure down off of that same ledge. It's a neat puzzle/tutorial, and one of the only instances of having something to do on the final floor of a cave other than fight the boss. Well, that's about it for the Bullblack's Kingdom, which may seem a little shocking. I mean, how come I have so little to say about a cave that I claimed was one of my favorites? Well, it all harps back to one of the key problems myself and many others have with Pikmin 2. The caves don't feel memorable, like at all. Due to the randomly generated aspect of the caves, it leaves them feeling dull and repetitive, with the most to talk about being new enemies and unique combat situations, which, in these early caves, not much is taken advantage of. Most of the caves kinda just blend in with each other, and there's not much to say about them individually, save for a few key exceptions. In the end, most of a cave's identity comes down to its boss and atmosphere, which makes sense, but it's unfortunate just how forgettable certain sublevels are. Look, my point in all of this is that just because I talk about a cave for a relatively short amount of time doesn't make it bad. It just means that everything it does has already been covered by other caves, and that's the big issue I think I have with Pikmin 2. Most of your time is spent in these forgettable caves with barely any discussion to be had, while the main overworld areas that I could gush about for hours are left as glorified travel points for the dungeon crawling escapades of each cave contained within. And now that we've covered all the basics of cave exploration, you'll start to notice I have much less to say about each one individually. And that's not a problem with the cave I'm discussing, it's a problem with the game as a whole. All that said, let's quickly go over the final cave of this area, the Snagret Hole. The Snagret Hole is guarded by a Snagret, right in the area where you originally fought them in the first game. Foreshadowing is a narrative device. This cave has 7 sublevels and a solid 15 treasures. This is another fun mid-game cave that may give you trouble, but doesn't feel unfair. Unfortunately, there's not much to talk about specifically. The Shearwig returns from the first game over on Sublevel 2, Sublevel 3 has 2 Snagrets as regular enemies, and Sublevel 4 gives us another good look at the watery blowhogs. Sublevel 5 introduces us to a brand new enemy, the Antenna Beetle. This guy is actually quite neat, because it's an enemy that can't attack, but focuses on disrupting one of your upgrades of all things, taking advantage of some of Pikmin 2's new additions. It'll disrupt your treasure tracker until you kill it, making it impossible to know if the floor has been cleared yet. It can also use a fake whistle to call Pikmin to its side, although this isn't like the Puffstool or anything, the Pikmin won't turn against you. They just won't listen to your whistle for a few seconds, which can make this thing annoying to deal with consistently. As cool of a concept as the Antenna Beetle is, I hate it. The Antenna Beetle is so annoying, and not even in a fun or challenging way. It just doesn't actually do anything to prevent you from clearing out the sublevel, it just messes with you and plays a loud, annoying noise on your treasure gauge. Oftentimes I kill this thing not out of necessity, but because I hate having to listen to it. I try hard to focus on this enemy whenever it appears, despite how it really isn't a threat at all, only because it's a threat to my sanity and my ears. Antenna Beetle goes in F tier. I haven't been ranking the enemies up to this point, and I won't be continuing to do so. I'm just sending a message. Sublevel 6 has an Antenna Beetle and 2 more Snagrets to deal with. Oh joy! Sublevel 7 is the boss floor, and contains a fight against the Pileated Snagret. I love this boss so much. It acts just like a regular Snagret, but has more health, and can fully come out of the ground to hop on the surface towards your squad. It's not a huge change, but I love it because it drastically changes the flow of the fight. For normal Snagrets, you can stay away from wherever they emerge and be perfectly fine. They can't move from the spot until they burrow somewhere else. But with the Pileated Snagret, the fight gets flipped on its head. Now, all of a sudden, it will approach you, and you have to be ready to defend yourself until it decides to burrow again. It's a classic role reversal that gives the fight an extra level of stress it wouldn't have had otherwise. Purple Pikmin do unfortunately wipe the floor with this thing, like everything else, but I will say, with the higher head placement and constant bouncing, aiming isn't exactly a simple task, so it may take a bit to get adjusted to the fight, which could cause some fun tension. The Pileated Snagret is an amazing boss, and it has a great design too. It has a green, scaly body with orange feathers and a more exaggerated beak. It's not too different to the point where you can't tell it's a Snagret, But it's not just a recolor. It has some extra flair that makes it iconic as a boss fight, especially in relation to other Snagrets. The pileated Snagret drops the Justice Alloy, another upgrade treasure. This one gives us access to the upgrade Metal Suit Z, which increases the HP of Olimar and Louis, making them far more durable. It's actually a pretty great upgrade. Without elemental immunities, it's pretty easy to take damage and get wiped on some more chaotic floors, so having this boost in durability is a lot nicer than you'd think, especially in Pikmin 2. Overall, the Awakening Wood is another solid area. I think it does enough to stand out from the Forest of Hope, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't live in that area's shadow. It was adjusted quite a bit, and thus the vibe feels drastically different from the area's predecessor, but it still harps back on the Forest of Hope to an unfortunate degree. I like this area a lot. I think it's solid overall, but it could have done more, especially in the way of differentiating itself from the last game. But it didn't do a bad job overall. It certainly did better than the third area did. But before we talk about the next area, I'd like to take a break to discuss some of the other modes in Pikmin 2. First things first, let's take a look at Challenge Mode. Pikmin 2 Challenge Mode is great. While the first game had a very lacking Challenge Mode, this game establishes the iconic side mode that the rest of the series would incorporate as a core part of its identity. We've got a total of 30 levels here. The goal is to find the key in each sublevel to move on to the next. Then, once you reach the end of the cave, you win. Keys can be found in enemies or just lying around. The goal is to go for a high score by collecting treasure along the way, which is a trend that later challenge modes would put far more emphasis on. But in this game, the emphasis is surprisingly less on treasure and more on survival. You actually get a far larger bonus for not losing a single Pikmin during the level, making it frankly pointless to waste your time on treasures other than the key. Just get in and get out without losing any Pikmin. When you beat a level with 0 Pikmin losses, the level will be completed with a pink flower rather than a white one, just like the flowers that purple and white Pikmin have. Which I am just now realizing that I never brought up until this moment, oops. Anyways, beating all 30 levels with the pink flower unlocks a secret cutscene. Louis' Dark Secret, the most obvious plot twist of all time. Louis ate the golden pick carrots. Who would have guessed? I actually have a ton to say about Louis as a character, but it's gonna have to wait a bit. Challenge mode is great, and pretty fun overall. Although, with it being another cave situation, the levels are left feeling pretty forgettable overall, unfortunately. There are a few exceptions. Bully Den is pretty good, Cave of Pain is fun, subterranean layers shouldn't exist, like how do you expect me to do this deathless? I mean, I did it because I'm unbelievably goated, but for any average person, who the hell gets out of this unscathed? Overall, I still think Pikmin 3 has a much better challenge mode. I know, take so cold you'd think I'm in the Valley of Repose, but still. Pikmin 2 did something really important here. It established what works for a Pikmin challenge mode, and that's not something to sneeze at. Plus, Challenge Mode has co-op, our first example of multiplayer Pikmin gameplay, and it works really, really well. Unfortunately, it's just cooperative, so you can't attack your friends, which is a real shame. If only this game had some sort of versus mode, that would be really cool. So two-player battle is a fun mode. Or at least, I've heard it is. Unfortunately, I don't have any friends nearly as autistic as I am to play Pikmin with, and even those nice enough to give it a shot stand no chance against someone with more knowledge on the Pikmin franchise and all its little gameplay quirks than knowledge of my own country. Like, yeah, of course I can tell you Spicy Spray boosts attack speed and sets all Pikmin types' attack stats to the same stat, which buffs some Pikmin types but actually nerfs purple Pikmin and red Pikmin because of the little quirk in the game design, but I couldn't tell you the state of the economy. I don't have time for that. This just in, apparently it's bad. So take everything I say in this section with a grain of salt. Unfortunately, this mode is a bit more of a blind spot for me. But enjoy the background footage of me playing through the mode while the second player sits and does nothing, because there is no second player and I am lonely. There are a few ways to win a two-player battle. The main way is to collect 4 yellow marbles, of which there are 7 scattered around the map, so only one player can reach a total of 4. It's a battle for marbles overall, but you could just steal your opponent's special red or blue marble depending on whether they're playing as Olimar or Louis to instantly win. capture the flag style. You'll also win if your opponent suffers a Pikmin extinction, which is pretty hard to do. If they suck at the game and get their own Pikmin killed, then boom, you win. But there's not much you can do to cause a Pikmin extinction. You can attack their Pikmin with your own, but Pikmin that die from other Pikmin will respawn after a few seconds. So if you can kill them all before one of them respawns, then yeah, you win the match, but this isn't reliable at all. Finally, you can also win by knocking out your opponent's captain. So, you know, just swarm them. There are 10 maps, each based on cave layouts. Boo! And one player gets to play as Louie with blue Pikmin, and the other gets to play as Olimar with red Pikmin. Now, you'd think this gives one player an unfair advantage with extra attack power, but that's actually not the case. Stats are adjusted to make this fight fair. Now, since there's already a precedent for red Pikmin's attack power being nerfed with Spicy Spray, you'd think that the game would just do that, right? Well, surprisingly no. In two-player battle, blue Pikmin are given the attack power of reds, making them actually sort of useful for once. There's also a ton of power-ups. Some just give you more Pikmin, bloom flowers, or give sprays, while others hinder the other player. The ghost power-up will make you invisible to the other player, but with this being split screen, you can kinda just, you know, peek over. But that's cheating, and screen peekers will receive a stern point and laugh. The marble return sends your marble all the way back to your base, which is useful in a pinch if your opponent is carrying away your marble. And there's also a few enemy and hazard power-ups that just drop on your opponent whenever they're used. These include withering blowhogs, snitch bugs, boulders, volatile dweevils, and watery or fiery blowhogs, depending on what Pikmin type your opponent has. They obviously receive the one that can hurt their Pikmin. The two-player battle also gives us these wonderful images of Olimar and Louie either angry that they're losing or happy that they're winning, and to this day the fandom still uses these as reaction images. Now, you may think I've covered all of the side modes in Pikmin 2, but think again, because only on the GameCube Japanese version there is yet another mode to be explored, that being the e-reader mode. So for those not aware, the e-reader was like Amiibo cards before Amiibo existed. It was this attachment you could plug into your Game Boy Advance that you would then use a GameCube link cable to connect to your GameCube, or a link cable to connect to another Game Boy Advance. Then, in compatible games, you would scan an e-reader card to unlock exclusive content. Reminder that it was not just enough for you to have the cards, you needed a whole other system and the attachment. For Game Boy Advance games that used this function, you needed to own 2 separate GBAs to actually use it. Oh, early 2000s Nintendo, what a delightful little f*** up you were. In any case, exclusively in Japan, Pikmin 2 got its own set of roughly 60 e-reader cards to collect, which would be scanned into the game to unlock exclusive minigames that you could play on your Game Boy, giving us some of the only official examples of 2D sprites for Pikmin characters. What a cute little idea. It makes me wonder what Pikmin would have looked like if it started out on an earlier console as 2D pixel art. How would that even work? Now, I want this video to be all-encompassing, but there's no way I'm gonna buy a Japanese GameCube, a Japanese copy of Pikmin 2, all the e-reader cards, and the e-reader adapter just for a teeny tiny segment of a huge analysis video, right? There's no way it'd actually be that crazy, right? Okay, so this is the part of the video where I would cut to me having actually bought everything and making a whole joke out of it, but for as insane as I am, and as much as I would love to do that, I'm a little broke and I can't afford that kind of investment right now. Unrelated, but subscribing is completely free, and so is sharing the video and liking and leaving a comment. Now, with this being like a whole different game that I haven't played, I really don't have much to say other than, wow, cool. They look like neat little puzzles and would be a fun time waster. Next up, let's take a look at some of the extra menus in the story mode. See, on level select, we can use the bumpers to access the treasure hoard or the Piclopedia, a place to look at all the enemies and treasures you've encountered in the adventure. You can even read Olimar and the ship's notes on the creatures and treasures. The ship won't give any notes on the creatures though, instead Louie will. Only after getting 100% though. But while Olimar gives lore on the biology of the creatures, Louie will tell you how to cook them. These notes are iconic, and I've already been bringing up brief lore tidbits when talking about creatures in the area analysis, but I want to take this moment to appreciate just how much Pikmin 2 really expanded the world of Pikmin. Each creature has an in-depth analysis that expands everything beyond just enemies to a real living and breathing ecosystem. There's so much here, and it's not talked about enough just how much of the heavy lifting Pikmin 2 did for the franchise. Later entries would expand on the Piklopedia a lot, but they would never fully remake it. Notes would still be taken from what Olimar had to say in this game. Yes, lore would be changed, but it would always be built on the base of Pikmin 2's Piklopedia. Like, it's insurmountable just how much these notes expanded the Pikmin world. I won't go into detail here, I already plan to cover every enemy in the game in decent detail anyways. Speaking of which, let's get back on track and take a peek at the next area. Oh, the Perplexing Pool, truly one of the areas ever. I'll be honest with you all, everything considered, the Perplexing Pool is my least favorite area in this game. Maybe even my least favorite Pikmin area overall, which pains me to say because there is a ton to like about this area. But, well, I don't know, the whole place just feels kinda been there, done that. This is our summer area, which is already one of my least favorite seasons aesthetically. I mean, I do really love summer. I feel like everyone is conditioned to adore the season simply because of its relation to school, or rather, lack thereof. But for the purposes of video games, where the aesthetics of the season matter the most, I really don't vibe with summer. It just feels like spring with less variety and more allergens. And in the context of Pikmin 2, it stands out among the other areas as pretty aesthetically directionless. I think my main gripe with the area simply comes down to how it really wears its Distant Spring roots on its sleeve. Being the second to last area in the game, you'd think that by the time people get here, they'd be pretty used to the idea that Pikmin 2 has been remixing areas from the first game, and while I can't speak for everyone, pretty much every Let's Play I've watched, or clip I've seen covering the Perplexing Pool, blind players will almost always only find out about the whole map remixing thing in this level. Assuming they've played Pikmin 1, of course. The Awakening Wood is different enough from the Forest of Hope that while really looking at that area will make it obvious it's a remix, most players wouldn't think about that kind of thing when playing the game for the first time. However, when people reach the Perplexing Pool, it's a different story. The architecture is so keenly reminiscent of the Distant Spring that people almost always make the realization in this area, especially since the puzzle to get to the cave, the shower room, is literally one for one the exact same puzzle and location on the map that you would do to get the repair-type bolt in the first game. I remember when I played these two games back to back as a kid, I saw this puzzle and immediately was reminded of the Distant Spring, leading little kid me to look around and start piecing together that it was the same area. And of course, that's when I went to look it up, and sure enough, Pikmin 2 reused some maps. And look, it's not like that's an inherently bad thing. I said with the Awakening Wood, it really stands out on its own as a fresh perspective on the Forest of Hope, to the point where if you aren't explicitly looking for the similarities, you wouldn't notice in the average playthrough what was going on. But since it feels like the Perplexing Pool is really just reheating those Distant Spring nachos and bringing frankly nothing new to the table aside from slightly different base location, it makes the remix feel less inspired and more lazy. Now, granted, story-wise, I do think it's a very neat form of environmental storytelling to point the player in the direction that these are the same areas as before, and recent lore has cleared up that canonically they are the same places, which is really neat from a story standpoint, especially considering the direction the franchise has taken most recently. But at the time, there wasn't really anything to gather from this other than it being a lazy asset flip. At least without any other context than what the game directly shows you. Look, I don't hate the Perplexing Pool, but I feel like it needed to do more to stand out as an area, both with its theme of summertime and its separation from the Distant Spring. But while I'm not a huge fan of this area aesthetically, I'd be lying if I said this place wasn't a fun time overall. After all, a remix of the Distant Spring is still a remix of the Distant Spring. I already adore this area's level design, and I feel like it lends well to Pikmin 2's more open nature, not to mention the music. For all its faults, I'll be the first to admit that the Perplexing Pool has one of the most catchy themes in the game. Unlike the Distant Spring before it, this theme is not subtle. It's bombastic and upbeat, fitting for this middle point in the game where the adventure is well underway, no matter how soon you tackle this area. The theme uses a beautiful bell synthesizer for its piano melody, a chorused electric guitar, and a triangle for an extra sprinkle of whimsy. Everything combines to create a really fun melody that sounds especially great in Louis' swing rhythm. This is probably one of my favorite songs in the soundtrack. It certainly gets stuck in my head the most. This is also the area that introduces yellows. They can be found in the middle of the map where the armored cannon beetle once was. I missed the armored cannon beetle. Anyways, without blue Pikmin, not much of this area is even very accessible. But once we come back with them, there's a ton to explore. Directly behind the base, we have a great puzzle where we have to throw white Pikmin onto a little island to dig up a treasure, and then throw them back so blues can carry it through the water. This treasure is an actual onion. It's called the Onion Replica, which I think is really funny. Over to the right, we have another great puzzle, where you'll have to lead some yellow Pikmin over the same bolt puzzle from the first game, and over to this new bridge. The reason you need yellows is because past the bridge there's an electric gate guarding a cave. You'll then need blue Pikmin to break open the entrance to the cave, which will drain the water around the cave. This also gives us access to another buried treasure. The back of the map has the exact same yellow puzzle from the first game, and in the place of a simple bramble gate past the water is now an electric gate. You'll need to throw yellows over the other side via a bridge, which is a really cool puzzle in my opinion, although when traveling with blues before completing this puzzle, it's a little too easy to bump into the gate and have them die on the spot. Over in the back of the map, we have another weight puzzle in the water, which never fails to annoy the shit out of me, and I'm not even going to try to explain how this one works. I feel like it changes every time I go to do it. As for the enemies in this area, we've got the usual suspects. Water Dumples return from the Distant Spring, Wallyhops and Walpoles are here in droves, there's a fiery Bullblax guarding the Poison Gate, so that kind of forces you to use some frankly normally unused types, there's a Withering Blowhog and some Whisker Pillars. Overall, there's some great enemy placements here. There are a few interesting decisions in the overworld. For one, dwarf bullbears appear without a parent, but only starting on day 11, with more spawning in with further days. Then on day 31, an adult bullbear appears alongside a beady longlegs in the middle of the map. We haven't talked about either of these enemies yet, but considering they both appear prominently in the caves in this area, I'd rather save the discussion for when we get into those caves, since that will most likely be the average person's first encounter with these creatures anyways. As for new enemies, we've got the Hermit Crawmad up first, a pretty unique enemy that I'd consider to be one of my favorites overall. These are little crabs that will poke their heads out of relatively obvious holes in the ground. They can't be attacked when they just poke their head out, but if you get close enough to them, they may try and dash towards your Pikmin to quickly steal one or two. After it does this, whether it's able to grab a Pikmin or not, it will run back to the hole. While it's trying to get back, the creature's backside will be exposed, which can be attacked. Once it reaches the hole, it will eat any Pikmin it caught and usually try again. These guys are pretty easy to deal with, especially with purple Pikmin, but I really like the mechanic of having to bait the Crawmad out before you can attack it. It's a unique strategy that isn't utilized much by other creatures in the series. Skitter leaves make their first appearance here. These are harmless enemies that look like leaves, but will scamper off if you get too close to them. I gotta be honest, I'm not sure why they decided to do this. The enemy is kind of pointless overall. They'd probably be a much more interesting enemy if they could, I don't know, quickly eat Pikmin when you pass them by and then disguise themselves again instantly so you can't tell which ones are actually alive and which ones aren't, so just walking by a pile of leaves is nerve-wracking. Actually, you know what? That sounds really annoying to deal with. On second thought, I'm glad they didn't do that. I sure hope they never will in any, I don't know, just spitballing here, future games. Let's hope they don't do that later. That would be, wow, that would just suck, wouldn't it? Finally, we have the Toady Bloister. Only one appears in this level, and it contains a treasure. This enemy is pretty freaky. Whenever it attacks, it sticks out long blue teeth-like sticks and makes an extremely loud noise that I can only describe as like a demonic cow. They have this tail on the back that almost looks like some sort of vegetable, while the rest of their body is this goopy purple substance that disintegrates upon death, leaving behind only the tail to collect. They also give you like an absurd amount of Pikmin. 25 to be exact, which is really weird for a surprisingly easy enemy to fight, and especially one with a weight of only 3 Pikmin. It's really odd. You can only kill them by attacking the tail, and as long as you stay behind this thing, they rarely get the chance to attack you. Something about the noises this thing makes, plus the texture of its model, just intrigues me. It's one of those rare creatures in Pikmin where I don't have much to say because it's just so nonsensical. Like, we got beetles, bird-snake hybrids, all sorts of bugs, and even some completely otherworldly creatures with no real-world comparison, but I don't know, something about the Bloister is just different. I mean, for any outsider looking in, Pikmin is already a weird series, but for superfans like me, yeah, we get adjusted to the weird designs, and just see this kind of stuff as normal for the most part. But something about the Bloister never sat right with me. I really think it's the noises that it makes. For something so otherworldly, it's weirdly down to earth in an uncanny degree. Why does this thing moo like a cow? Like, really though, why? Someone explain this to me. Well, those are all the new enemies in the perplexing pool, and overall, I love this area's overworld design. I just wish it had an interesting aesthetic and stood out more overall. There's a lot to like about this area for sure, but at the same time, it just feels so incomplete. Having good level design and fun enemy placement won't cut it when every other level does the exact same stuff alongside a unique and well thought out aesthetic. Is that just me? Do I just not like summer that much? Can I just not enjoy a summer area? Because, I'm complaining about the aesthetic and all, but I don't know what I'd fix about the area per se, because it does the whole summer theme well. I just don't think I like the theme of summer. I just don't think it's all that interesting. Especially coming off the heels of the Awakening Wood and the absolute whimsy that is spring. The more I talk about this, the more I feel like I'm kinda just a D1 summer hater. Do I just hate touching grass that much? Mid-area aside, I gotta say, the Perplexing Pool has some of the best caves in the game. The Valley of Repose has a weird mix of baby easy and flat-out unfair, and the Awakening Wood has pretty stale caves overall, but the Perplexing Pool? Pretty much every cave in this area has a unique gimmick that provides a fun challenge while not being flat-out unfair, or at the very least, it's all manageable. So long as you don't let it find you, that is. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The first cave we find directly outside of the base is the Citadel of Spiders. Much like the Snagret Hole in Bulblack's Kingdom before it, this cave has a bit of a theme in the enemy types it uses. And much like those caves, it breaks the theme pretty quickly. This cave has 5 sublevels and 11 treasures. The first sublevel is pretty easy, with only 1 treasure to collect and just a few shearwigs to deal with. Nothing crazy. Sublevel 2 gives us a few dweevils to deal with, just 3 fiery ones carrying around a few treasures, making good use of their unique disguise mechanics. Sublevel 3 has a ton of anode beetles and a few snitch bugs, which makes sense. The floor sort of acts like a tutorial for yellow Pikmin, showing off their new immunity alongside the extra height that they get. I like this idea, especially considering you unlock yellows in this area. Most players will find this cave pretty soon after. It lends itself to what I think the game did excellently, that being having secret tutorials not through dialogue, but through level design, slowly nudging you in the right direction to interact with the game's mechanics. It's used quite efficiently here, although for a cave called the Citadel of Spiders, it's weird to see how they have only appeared on 1 floor so far. And, well, guess what? Sublevel 4 also lacks any spiders. This floor has a few crawmads and water dumples, but no water. Blues aren't required for this cave after all, but don't fret, we'll see blue Pikmin get put to use very soon. Anyways, the final sublevel is a boss floor, but unlike other boss floors, it actually has more than 1 treasure. For some reason, there's a buried treasure on a ledge by the start of the floor. Completely disconnected from the arena and very easy to miss, which is very odd. I know I've had my fair share of playthroughs where I forgot about this treasure completely and have to go back to pick it up immediately after leaving the cave. It's just as frustrating as it sounds. Anyways, the boss of this cave is the beady Longlegs. Returning from the first game, this guy hasn't changed one bit. You'll be able to take it down easily with yellows, or you can just wait until it gets low enough to the ground to throw some purples and take it out easily. The upgrade this guy drops is the key. It actually doesn't upgrade anything for you during the playthrough. Rather, this treasure unlocks challenge mode, which is really cool at first, but in later playthroughs, since challenge mode has already been unlocked, you realize that while the game does count this as an upgrade, it quite literally does nothing. Honestly, I remember the Citadel of Spiders being a little more exciting, but researching it for this video really makes me realize how it's kind of just another mid-cave with nothing really special to it. Maybe it's because I often lump the cave in with the other great caves in the perplexing pool, because, comparatively speaking, this one's kinda underwhelming when put up against the other 3 caves around it. Speaking of which, the Glutton's Kitchen is a cave with 6 sublevels and an insane amount of treasures at a whopping 14. The cave has so much in it and can be accessed so early that oftentimes I see people getting the debt cleared by this cave. Obviously, with the open nature of Pikmin 2, people have naturally cleared the debt in many different ways. Sometimes I see people's final cave being the subterranean complex, other times I see people just barely make it out of a cave with a little under the Poco requirement and then finish the debt with an overworld treasure. But if I had to wager a guess, I'd say that the most common moment in which the average Pikmin 2 player clears the debt is upon leaving the Glutton's Kitchen. There's just enough treasure to go around in this cave, and it's found so early, but just late enough for players to have already gotten a few thousand Pocos by the time they enter it. And with the cave having over 1,000 Pocos worth of treasures, or a staggering 10% of the whole debt, I think the cave makes the perfect storm to be a sort of final boss for a lot of players. Ironically, of course, Pikmin 2 doesn't really end when you clear the debt, but we're getting off track now. The Glutton's Kitchen may not get its namesake from any specific kind of enemy, but ironically, I'd say it does the best job at having a theme for its enemy type compared to things like the Snagret Hole and the Citadel of Spiders. See, the Glutton's Kitchen is themed around everybody's favorite enemy, the bread bug. The cave takes place in a big toy box, a unique aesthetic at this point in the game, so sublevel 1 isn't too crazy. Just 1 treasure along with a few dwarf bullbears. But sublevel 2 begins to heat things up with the reintroduction of the bread bugs. These guys work slightly differently in this game compared to how they used to work. Now, instead of grabbing objects with a weight limit of 1, they can grab pretty much any object on the field, including treasures. This floor contains 3 bread bugs, all with their own treasure, so you'll have to play a bit of tug of war to defeat them, and get each one. Anything a bread bug collects will pop up after they're defeated, right by where they had their hole. So there's no risk in letting them take a treasure entirely, but even so, you'll want to steal items away from them while they're carrying them in order to defeat them easily. Sublevel 3 also has you dealing with bread bugs, although this time you'll have a ton of anode beetles, making the entire floor dangerous for Pikmin types other than yellows. Sublevel 4 is another great one, as it sort of does a fake out. You'll still have to deal with some bread bugs naturally, but with how dark the floor is, you really shouldn't get tunnel vision. Be alert of your surroundings, because this floor introduces the other roaming enemy in Pikmin 2, the spotty bullbear. Now, while bullbears used to be just buffed up versions of bulborbs, they really aren't in this game. Bullbears are a major threat in Pikmin 2. They'll roam around the map looking for Pikmin, while dwarf bullbears follow them. Once they see you, they'll chase you down and eat Pikmin rapidly. You're gonna want to use purples to get the jump on them before they can spot you. If you stun them, they aren't a huge threat, but with how big they are, it may be difficult to land a slam attack directly, and if you mess up, they won't waste a second in noticing that you're there and immediately attacking. Even worse, just like the Groinks, these guys can come back to life if left unattended, so you'll need to prioritize getting them back to the ship as soon as you possibly can. Sublevel 5 has you dealing with some cannon larvae, and sublevel 6 is naturally a boss floor. But this one's a bit unique. The boss of this cave is the giant bread bug. There are 4 treasures around the floor that it and a few small bread bugs will try to steal. The boss fight here is just playing tug of war and whittling down the boss's HP by stealing its items. It's so unique and a really nice change of pace, but the floor isn't entirely safe. You'll still have a ton of electricity to deal with along with anode beetles, making even moving around the floor extremely deadly for anything but yellow Pikmin. Consider taking out all the electrical hazards first before focusing on the bread bugs. Then, you'll be able to safely bring purples to add much needed weight when trying to steal items back from the bread bugs. The upgrade of this cave is the anti-electrifier, made of the treasure Dream material. It makes your captains immune to electricity. Helpful, but nothing groundbreaking. The shower room is another cave with a neat gimmick, and honestly a pretty long one. With 7 sublevels and 14 treasures, you'll need a sizable army of blue Pikmin to have a chance at completing this cave. This is also the first cave that introduces us to boulders falling from the sky, which can crush Pikmin instantly. On sublevel 1, by the way, they throw you straight into the deep end with this one. Pun entirely intended. Sublevel 2 is no different, although this one introduces us to a new enemy, the lesser jelly float. Jelly floats will eat Pikmin much like any other enemy, but they take an extremely long time to digest. And with jelly floats being see-through, you can actually see and hear any Pikmin that it's sucked up. Easiest way to deal with these guys is to just weigh them down like a puffy blowhog, and then throw purples when they're on the ground to make quick work of them. These guys are especially annoying when dealing with enemies that actually have a chance to hurt you, because they can very easily suck up a ton of your party and float away. So you'll have to prioritize them before all those Pikmin get digested. It's very rare that you'll actually lose Pikmin to a jelly float. That doesn't mean they should be taken lightly. Just be careful and weigh them down quickly and you'll be perfectly fine. Speaking of which, Sublevel 3 introduces the Greater Spotted Jelly Float, a larger jelly float with pink spots that has more HP and can suck up more Pikmin. It's just a slightly stronger jelly float, nothing crazy. Sublevel 4 is a rest floor, with just a few unmarked Spectralids and one treasure, so we can skip past it. At least that's what I would say, but we need to talk about the treasure we find on this floor. The Arboreal Frippery is an infamous treasure. In the Switch version, as well as the European version on GameCube, the treasure is just a common maple leaf. That's it. But as many of you probably know, in the original North American and Japanese releases of the game, the treasure looked like this. A slightly different shape, and a shade of green for the leaf. This, too, is a maple leaf, from maple trees in Japan to be exact. Many people commonly assumed that the treasure was changed to be an orange maple leaf as a form of censorship, but this isn't true. It was just done to resemble more commonly found maple leaves in Europe for the European version. And this was the version of the treasure they used for the Switch version. Simple as that. But why would people think this was a form of censorship? It's just a Japanese maple leaf after all. And while that is true, to an American audience, this leaf resembled something very different. Yeah, no, so what was meant to be a maple leaf, the decision to not give North American audiences a different design led pretty much everyone to assume that this was a marijuana leaf, thus the needed censorship. But all of that isn't even the reason the treasure is infamous. Well, it's only half the reason, really. Due to the common misconception that this treasure represented a marijuana leaf, Olimar's notes on the treasure have been posted everywhere, surprising new and old fans alike. A common screenshot from Pikmin 2 has been floating around online for the longest time. This is taken from the original version of the game, where the treasure most clearly resembled marijuana and showed Olimar saying, "In the interest of scientific discovery, I'd better give it a test run." So yes, official dialogue from a Pikmin game painted Olimar as saying he was going to take a test run of a leaf which looked almost exactly like weed. This has led to a widespread joke that Olimar is a pothead, with constant memes online of him smoking blunts and painting him as a common enjoyer of the kush. This has evolved from a small joke to a half-ironic, half-serious fan interpretation of the character, since most people take what he says in the notes at face value, and just assumed that he smoked the treasure. And while I do find the joke really funny, I'm gonna have to be the fun police for a bit here and clarify some things. First of all, the plant is not meant to be cannabis, as we established, but even then, the screenshot that people use as evidence to prove that Olimar enjoys a good blaze isn't exactly accurate. Yes, it is a direct screenshot from Pikmin 2, and it isn't edited at all. But what people fail to realize is that Pikmin 2 has very small text boxes, so for long notes, they allow you to scroll from the top to the bottom to read everything a character has to say. The notes on the Arboreal Frippery fall victim to this part of the game's design, as the image that people commonly spread online shows the very bottom of Olimar's notes, with the text box obscuring the first sentence. If you check the game for yourself, you'll see that what Olimar actually says is, "The ship seems to think this leaf would be a smash hit among naturalist interior designers. I just think it looks like a really soft blanket. In the interest of scientific discovery, I'd better give it a test run." So no, Olimar does not smoke weed. He just wanted to use it as a blanket. I'm very sorry for anybody out there who had their day ruined because you thought Olimar was a stoner. And I'm also very sorry to any Jelly Float fans who are upset that I spent more time talking about weed than I did on that enemy. Sublevel 5 throws some Jelly Floats and Dwarf Bulborbs at us, plus some Dweevils, Blowhogs, and a Wollihop. Nothing insane. Speaking of Dweevils, Sublevel 6 introduces us to the Anode Dweevil, the most dangerous elemental Dweevil by far. Yes, it does the exact same thing as any other Dweevil, but this time it expels electricity, so it can be an insta-kill. Otherwise, it's just a dweevil, so you know the drill by now. We get introduced to the doodlebug on this sublevel, a variant of the iridescent flint beetle that more or less acts the same, except this time they will only drop bitter spray doses, which is nice, but be careful, because every time this bug moves, they'll expel a little cloud of poison. It's not a big deal, but if you're not careful, you might lose a couple Pikmin to these guys. Don't focus too much on landing the hit and getting extra sprays, just focus on making sure your Pikmin don't die. It usually isn't worth the trouble. Although, if you know exactly where a doodlebug spawns on any given floor, you can intentionally only take white Pikmin to grind some sprays if you want. Sublevel 7 is the boss floor, and this time we're fighting the Ranging Bloister, a variant of the Toady Bloister with more health, as well as being a lot bigger. The tail on the back is also smaller compared to the size of its body, so aiming Pikmin is a little bit more difficult for this boss compared to its regular counterpart. The Ranging Bloister also has a unique mechanic where it will always target the captain, never the Pikmin. Any Pikmin it eats in the process are just collateral damage. It targets the player so much, in fact, that it's nearly impossible to get to the back of this guy, but interestingly enough, if you split up the captains, the Bloister will only target whichever one you are actively playing as. And when you switch captains, the Bloister takes a moment to adjust. So if you set up one captain in the back and one in the front and only give one of them Pikmin, you can play as the solo captain to distract the boss and then quickly switch to throw Pikmin while it's distracted. Rinse and repeat until you've wiped the floor with it. It's not a hard boss at all. Unless, of course, one of your captains dies at any point in the cave, in which case you are just completely fucked. Like, there's no way it will let you get to the back with one captain. Just come back later. The upgrade this guy drops is the Amplified Amplifier. Great name, guys, real creative. This gives us access to the Mega Tweeter, which increases the range of our whistle. I've personally never had any problems with this upgrade, but I know that quite a lot of people do. People argue that the large whistle makes precision really clunky when you only need like a few Pikmin. I never found it to be a big deal or anything, but I thought I'd mention it at least. The final cave of the perplexing pool is the one, the only, Submerged Castle. A cave with 5 floors and 13 treasures. Nothing crazy, but this cave is iconic and rather infamous. Mainly because of how terrifying it can be. But what's so scary about this cave? Well, first and foremost, this cave has all 4 elemental hazards in it, which isn't uncommon for this stage in the game. In fact, it's to be expected. So, what's the issue? It's the cave's entrance. The cave is surrounded entirely by water, meaning you can only bring blue Pikmin into this cave. I talked about this with the first game, but I adore stuff like this. The point of blue Pikmin is to be underpowered, to be only really needed for water where no other Pikmin can go, so forcing the players to be in water and use the objectively weakest Pikmin type forces adaptability and challenges the player overall. It's why blue Pikmin work, in my opinion. And with the Submerged Castle, we get to see this idea utilized on the most unique cave of the game. It's a super fun idea, and I'm glad it's here. But only being able to take blue Pikmin into the cave, while also having to deal with a bunch of elemental hazards, is going to be tough. But luckily, since this is a cave, we can take our time and meticulously go through each floor to minimize potential casualties. Right? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. For now, let's take a deeper look into the Submerged Castle, but before we dive in, let's only take 60 blue Pikmin. Trust me, you'll want this exact number. The cave starts off with its own original music, but this one is odd. Very tonally distinct from the rest of the soundtrack. In fact, it is entirely distinct from the rest of the soundtrack down to its very core. The Submerged Castle theme is the only song in the entire game to remain unchanged whether the player is fighting enemies or not, or depending upon what character the player is controlling. Its rhythm never changes, instruments are never added, it just remains eerie. Even for players who don't notice the subtle changes in music consciously, the tonal dissonance of the Submerged Castle's theme, as well as its refusal to change, is made to unnerve the player. Your ears are trained subconsciously throughout the entire playthrough to be used to instruments dropping in and out of the soundtrack, changes in the rhythm and tonal adjustments that occur naturally in order to immerse you in the environment. If the submerged castle changed when you were fighting enemies, it wouldn't be nearly as effective, because despite the creepy song, the status quo hasn't been broken. But since the game goes out of its way to make the music as unfamiliar as possible, right down to the very way it interacts with the environment, it naturally puts the player on edge, keying them into the fact that something is deeply wrong with this place. The song is an irregular, yet consistent rhythm, played on a break drum with a mix of male and female harmonizers in the background, giving off eerie humming, as if someone, or something, is following you, humming a tune in your ear. Take a listen. Something is clearly deeply wrong with this cave, and with nothing but blue Pikmin to guide you through the corridors, all you can do is start exploring the first sublevel. The first floor is fire-themed, so you should probably take a group of reds and... oh, yeah, right. Well, just take your 60 blues and be meticulous, but quick. There are 7 fire geysers to deal with, and 2 fiery blowhogs, which won't be an issue at all. There are also 2 treasures to find on this floor. The third and final treasure is stuck inside a fiery bullblax. Blue Pikmin can't damage this thing in its regular state, so you'll need to bring it over to a nearby pool of water to extinguish it and then attack. But be careful because you don't have any purples to stun it. You may lose some Pikmin to this thing, but if you're able to lead it into a pool, you can bitter spray it after it's extinguished. Then, if you need more firepower, spicy spray the blues to buff their attack, and you should be able to take it out no problem. It may be a waste of sprays, but if you have a ton stored up, it's worth using them here. Collecting the final treasure completes the floor, so we're all safe to move on now. But what if you were a little too nervous? What if the bullblacks gave you a bit more trouble and you took a bit longer to get that treasure? What if you forgot to take out a fire geyser, so while some blues were carrying a treasure back, they got hit by it and died? So you need to go over there and take out the geyser and then continue, wasting even more time. Whatever the case, you weren't perfect, and each little imperfection added up to a little too much time spent on this sublevel, and without even knowing it, you've slowly been sealing your fate. If you spend any more than exactly 5 minutes on any of the first 4 sublevels in the submerged castle, this will happen. This is the Water Wraith, your punishment for taking too long, and the reason why this cave is so terrifying. The Water Wraith is a being made of water on 2 stone rollers. It is completely invulnerable with no way for Pikmin to latch onto it. The ship's dialogue theorizes that the creature's physical form is anchored in another dimension, since the radar won't pick up on the Water Wraith as a living creature. Olimar's notes in the Piclopedia state that the creature causes mass panic and hysteria, being a creature that frankly disobeys the laws of physics, an otherworldly entity. Olimar even says that he's not sure if the creature is even real at all, or simply an illusion, a trick the mind makes out of fear. But it is real. It is very real. Louis' notes cite the creature as inedible and known to cause mass hysteria, but talking about the thing isn't gonna do you any good, because right now, this thing is invulnerable. The only thing you can possibly do is run. When the Wraith appears, the music will pick up into a frantic and panicked rhythm, made to stress you out and emphasize that you need to leave as soon as you possibly can. Anything the Water Wraith rollers touch will be crushed instantly. This means that you can use the Wraith to kill enemies and hazards that you failed to take out beforehand. But make no mistake, it's interested in nothing but you. The Wraith will always follow the active leader, but go out of its way to crush as many Pikmin as possible on its path towards you. You can try and lead it away from your group of Pikmin, but that can only last so long. The Water Wraith is smart, and it can crush Pikmin quickly, especially if they're carrying something. The best course of action is to quickly get the rest of the treasures and try your best to lead it away from your Pikmin. Get everything and get out. Once you enter another sublevel, it will be gone, and the 5-minute timer will begin yet again. So while we catch our breath, let's take a moment to appreciate how awesome this is. It's a complete flip of the cave mechanic. Up to this point, caves have been slow, meticulous areas where you need to use every Pikmin type to their full potential. Time doesn't matter here. You can take your time and think strategically. But just when you're comfortable with this formula, the game flips everything on its head by giving you a cave where not only are you now on a time limit where every second counts and strategy matters far less than efficiency, but you're also only limited to one Pikmin type, and the weakest one by far. You can't use everything to its full potential, you just have to push through with limited resources. It is quite literally trial by fire. You need to think quickly on your feet, use unconventional strategies quickly and efficiently. Adapt to the cave, adapt to what little you have, and be fast about it. Or you can be slow and thoughtful. Let the water wraith spawn and get rid of everything for you. Better to deal with one massive threat than dozens of little ones, right? The water wraith isn't vulnerable anyway. I'm not going to try to fight it, so I'd rather deal with that than have to fight enemies that blue Pikmin just weren't made to defeat. If you can't think fast and stall the water wraith, then stall the floor and run fast. It's such genius game design and even better subversion. It still connects to the core ethos of Pikmin as a series, that being the whimsy of discovery, the drive to find new strategies to become more and more efficient, while also limiting you drastically in the process. Yes, more options gives the player more opportunities for strategies, but the more you have access to, the more you'll fall into one strategy that you know works. Sometimes the best way to give a player more options is to take away the player's options. It's tricky, and if it isn't done well, it can be frustrating and frankly unfair, but the Submerged Castle executes this concept perfectly. It forces adaptation, but it never locks you into one playstyle. It's genius, and hands down, the best use of blue Pikmin in the entire series, and I mean that wholeheartedly. Despite still being on a timer, Sublevel 2 is sort of like a rest floor. There aren't any hazards to deal with, and there's only a few enemies to get past. That being said, the floor is big, so be quick and precise. Luckily, this floor introduces us to the Bulbmen. While it is possible to find these guys in the Frontier Cavern, most players will come across the Bulbmen for the first time in the Submerged Castle. This is why you should only bring 60 blue Pikmin. A total of 40 Bulbmen can spawn in this cave, but they won't spawn if you brought in too many blues. We already went over what Bulbmen do, so naturally they'll be invaluable moving forward. They're limited, but they make the cave more manageable. They let you take out hazards without fear, but require you to be far more careful about what Pikmin you use, which can be a waste of time. Bulbmen are always found following an adult. Kill the adult and whistle them to add to your party. Speaking of which, the adult is a new enemy, so let's talk about it. Bulbmen, the enemy, not the Pikmin type, are much like dwarf Bulborbs, but they can't be insta-killed. They have slightly more HP and are a bit bigger. They can also eat more Pikmin at a time and will roam around like Bulbears, but they won't revive like the two roaming enemies in the game, so that's something. The Bulbmen on this floor contains a treasure, and there are two other treasures on this floor that you'll need to pry away from Dweevils, wasting precious time. Sublevel 3 is the electricity sublevel, so Bulbmen are a must. Luckily, we have another adult Bulbmen on this floor to get some more. There's also some anode beetles and anode Dweevils, spread throughout the floor, with 3 treasures in total, one inside a withering blowhog. To help with speed, there is an ivory candy pop bud to get some white Pikmin, but having to worry about them when walking in water may be more trouble than it's worth. No treasures are buried underground in this cave, so you don't need white Pikmin at all. I assume this flower is here because the next floor has a ton of poison, and no matter how hard you try, blues can't get rid of poison emitters. So if you bring in 100 blue Pikmin and get to sublevel 4 without losing any, you won't have any Bulbmen to deal with the poison, and you'd be virtually soft-locked. So a candy pop bud to convert some blues into whites counteracts this, but it's better just to use Bulbmen. This is a tough floor, but it's nothing crazy. The big issue is going fast while managing the electricity. If you mess up on the previous floors, you could always call Pikmin back without any harm. But on this floor, you'll need to be far more careful while still maintaining speed, hence why Bulbmen are invaluable here. Sublevel 4 is the poison floor. There's only 3 poison emitters, and there aren't actually any enemies that emit poison themselves, no munged weevils or anything. What you really gotta worry about on this floor are the bomb rocks, since there are 11 that fall from the ceiling, and 2 Kneering Dirigibugs, which will send down even more, and 5 volatile Dweevils just to make the whole situation worse. There are 2 adult Bulbmen on this floor, giving us a total of 40 Bulbmen. We have yet another 3 treasures here. One of them is inside an iridescent glint beetle. You may be tempted to ignore it, thinking it only has sprays and you can't afford to get distracted, but pay attention to your treasure gauge. It'll make it pretty clear that one of the treasures is in the beetle. Dodging bomb rocks, we can quickly make our way to the final sub-level. Much like with other caves, this is still a boss floor. But what boss are we even fighting? Compared to what we had to deal with in this cave, what could possibly be the big challenge? Well, before we enter the arena, we can use these 2 violet candy pop buds to get 10 purple Pikmin. Nice of them to give us purple Pikmin for the boss fight, but again, what could this boss possibly be? Entering the arena, down drops the Water Wraith himself. Nothing about him has changed. He's still invulnerable, so what are we even supposed to do? Well, think about what has changed. The Wraith hasn't, but you have something you didn't before. That's right, purple Pikmin. By throwing a purple near the Wraith and letting it do a slam, the shockwave of the slam will scare the Water Wraith, causing it to take physical form. Yes, purple Pikmin are so unbelievably busted that even their mere presence can scare an interdimensional being so bad that its physical form becomes grounded in this reality. When in its physical form, the Water Wraith is stunned and can be damaged. It's super easy to take down like this. Once you take out its health, the rollers explode and it stands up. So now that we've removed the creature's rollers, we can face it directly, and so the real boss fight begins. The Water Wraith will run away. Without the rollers, it's completely harmless, so you'll have to chase it down and scare it back into a vulnerable state. You can then kill it super easily. This is the easiest boss fight in the game by far, and I love it. You spend the entire cave in fear, running away from this terrifying creature, and when you finally get to face it down, you get the tools to give it a taste of its own medicine, and scare it into being completely harmless. It's such a cool moment, and an amazing way to close out such a unique cave. The easiest part of this cave is the boss fight. Even the way you defeat the Water Wraith is a subversion of everything the game has taught you to expect. It's so genius. I cannot stress enough just how much I adore this. It's one of the best encounters in the whole game. The Water Wraith drops the professional noisemaker, giving us access to the upgrade, the Pluckaphone. This upgrade lets us pluck Pikmin just by whistling the sprouts. Probably the best upgrade in the game, which makes sense considering all you have to go through to get it. Overall, the Perplexing Pool is another great area. Despite all my problems with it, I think it's really carried by its caves, having some of the best in the game by far. The Submerged Castle really carries this area for me. The overworld may be my least favorite, but I can still really appreciate the Perplexing Pool for everything it is, especially considering its caves. Well, there we go. We've covered all 3 main areas in Pikmin 2. But how exactly do we go about unlocking the 4th area? Well, to understand that, we need to take a quick break and talk about the story up to this point. Pikmin 2 doesn't have a crazy deep story or anything, but what it does have is told through the mail system. This replaces the voyage log, and I'm conflicted on this. I love the voyage log. It's one of the best parts of the original game. But it wouldn't have worked for this game. Olimar has people to talk to here. It's not isolating like it was before, so instead, Olimar receives messages from people back on Hakatate. Much like the voyage log, certain messages only appear after certain requirements, but they're far less specific in this game, and the messages are more random. They are determined by how many Pokos you have, or if the debt is repaid. Mail can be sent from any of the following characters: the president of Hakatate Freight, Olimar's wife, Olimar's son, Olimar's daughter, the president's wife, Louie's grandmother, and a spam caller. None of these characters are given any proper names beyond their relation to the captains, but we do get to see a lot of these characters receive some actual personalities for once. The spam caller does a ton of common scam speeches. You know, get a discount on this item, here's a commercial for some game system, hot singles in your area, just the normal stuff, all of them linked to the Nintendo website as the quote-unquote spam link. It's cute. The president gives you status updates on how he's doing back on Hakatate. First he's lonely, then he's hunted down by load sharks, then he lives with wolves, average Shacho activities. This is mainly the character to give you updates that alert you on how well you're doing. There's not much of a story to analyze here, and honestly, that goes for most of these. But just to show you what I mean, we'll take a look at each character and see how they're presented in the mail. Olimar's family gets by far the most characterization, but they still don't get much. Olimar's wife has some interesting characterization. She's shown to be a loving wife, but her flaws are also on full display. She's shown to be very irresponsible with money, often sending messages about how she messed up and spent too much. which is a character trait that is honestly shown to be common for Hakatations. Later in the series, we'll see how characters from other planets have a big stereotype that they see Hakatations under. That being that they're all money-hungry, irresponsible treasure hunters that have no object permanence and spend money as soon as they make it, which is very much so represented in Olimar's wife. This has led to a pretty commonly held belief, or joke, in the community that Olimar's wife is a gold digger and is manipulative towards Olimar. This really is mostly a joke, but I think it shows a big problem with the writing of these messages. These characters are very one-note, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm not a huge fan of some of the only dialogue we get from Olimar's wife being presented as a joke, especially following all the little bits of characterization we got from Olimar's notes in the first game. I'd argue that the way Olimar talked about his family in Pikmin 1 characterizes them better than the dialogue they give us in Pikmin 2. Both of Olimar's children have even less character, but I'm not super bothered by this. They are shown to be very young after all. They mainly just comment on what's been going on back on Hakatate. It's cute, but nothing all that special. We also get to see Louie's grandmother and the president's wife, so seeing some family members to give more context to these characters is nice, but let's put a pin in those characters for now. The mail system does far less for the story than the voyage log did in the first game, which really sucks to me. I loved the subtle storytelling that the voyage log provided, but I also see that they wanted to go in a different direction in terms of the story with this game. It's not bad by any means, but I just prefer how the first game handled it. In any case, once the debt has been cleared, we get this really great, nicely rendered cutscene for the end of the game. Olimar blasts off in the company ship and says goodbye once more to the planet, looking back one last time, before realizing he completely forgot Louie. The game's credits show Louie stranded on the planet, exploring it on his own, but he looks oddly content with it, almost seeming at peace. Let's put a pin in that for now. After the credits roll, we get another cutscene. The president is thoroughly pleased with the treasure that we've brought back, but being the money-hungry businessman he is, he instructs Olimar and Louie to go back to the planet once again to get every last treasure they missed. He then realizes that Louie isn't there, and decides to go with Olimar himself. Yeah, so you may have noticed for a bit of the footage that I haven't had Louie as my second captain. I've actually had the president, because once you clear the debt, he becomes your second captain for the rest of the game. Oh, and the ship is also gold now, because he simply couldn't wait to spend the money he already owed. The president does seem to have a name, as when you switch to him, he'll call out Shacho, a name I talked about earlier, but this is the reason why it's commonly seen as his actual name. Plus, there have been multiple instances in recent history of official Pikmin content referring to him as Shacho, so we'll just call him that. Shacho has a car horn for his whistle, but is otherwise just like Louie and Olimar. It's at this point in the game that we'll start to see mail coming from his wife, wondering where he is. So that's the story past the point of the debt being cleared. It's nothing crazy, but it gives us a new objective of finding and rescuing Louie in the post-game, which is a fun way to continue the game beyond its initial goal. But what I really like about this story is what it doesn't tell us. Pikmin 1 had amazing characterization for Olimar. He is an amazingly fleshed out character that I had a ton to say about. But what about this game? What does Pikmin do to stand out and characterize its new captains? What's the deal with Louie? Louie is an amazing character, one who is just as fleshed out as Olimar, despite having a small fraction of the dialogue total. But what Olimar gets across with his words, Louie gets across with his actions. At first, he seems like a one-note, dumb sidekick character, but the deeper you look into Louie, the more you start to see a well-thought-out character that acts as the perfect foil to what Olimar represents. Louie is interesting. He doesn't talk much in the main game, but he is quite well-spoken in his notes. Louie is portrayed to us as a character without much to say. A mystery, often playing an antagonistic role, or at least a mischievous one. And yet, the fandom loves him because of who he is beyond that. In the Piglopedia, he gives in-depth notes on how to cook and eat every single creature in the game. In the mail from his Nana, he's shown to be quite interested in food overall. And it shows. For a character so underspoken, his notes on food rival even the formality of Olimar's everyday speech. And yet, he refuses to, or perhaps can't, talk to anyone else about anything actually quote-unquote important. He's shown to have a dream of starting his own cooking show, despite also being relatively antisocial. So what is Louie's deal? Well, hear me out. I think he may be a commentary on neurodivergence. Perhaps not intentionally, but I do think he's very neurodivergent coded. Let me tell you a quick story. There's this kid, right? Can't pay attention in class, has a difficult time making friends, and has a really hard time talking about anything other than the things that they're interested in. But wow, does this kid light up when talking about Pikmin. This kid will talk your ear off about every little tiny detail in each of the Pikmin games, but despite this insanely accurate and impressive memory, you couldn't get this kid to tell you what just happened in the short story the class just read. Does this sound familiar? Technically speaking, it shouldn't, because I just described myself. But I have a sneaking suspicion that a solid portion of the people watching this video have a similar story to the one I just told. Pikmin fans are known to be odd. Something about this series just attracts a certain kind of person. I personally have ADHD, and I have a very hard time paying attention to or keeping a conversation about anything that I'm not hyper-fixated on. But I think for myself, and many others, Pikmin hooked us because of its multitasking gameplay, its fun world, its colorful characters, etc. So what's my point in all of this? Well, I think I know why Louis is so loved by so much of the community. I think in a sense, whether we realize it or not, a lot of Pikmin fans relate to Louis on a fundamental level. We can all relate to that feeling of being quiet, not interacting with the people around us while we daydream and ramble on about our special interests. In the same way that my hyperfixation has always been Pikmin, for Louis it's always been cooking. Am I saying that Louis is autistic? That he has ADHD? That he's 1000% confirmed to be neurodivergent? Absolutely not. But I do believe strongly that Pikmin fans are very likely to be neurodivergent. And I think the reason so many of us adore Louis is because we relate to his struggles on a fundamental level. Maybe he wasn't exactly written to be neurodivergent, but for better or for worse, he displays symptoms that a lot of Pikmin fans can relate to. But I don't want to just say this without backing up my claims, so to get to the bottom of this hypothesis, I ran a little survey. A few weeks before writing this, I put out a survey in a ton of Pikmin Discord servers with two very simple questions. The first was, would you consider yourself to be neurodivergent in any way? And the second question was, who is your favorite Pikmin character? Now, while survey participants argued over the results that Google Forms shows you, I lurked in the background looking at the data that really mattered. First and foremost, of 73 total responses, the people who said that they were neurodivergent made up over 75% of the total participants. And considering only Pikmin fans were taking this survey, we can conclude that my hypothesis is most likely correct that most Pikmin fans are in some way neurodivergent. For the second question, unsurprisingly, Olimar came in first with around 52% of the votes, and Louis came in second with about 32%. These were the two pieces of data presented at first, but that's not what I wanted to look at. So to truly determine Louis' relationship to neurodivergence, I combed through each individual response and made two new sets of data. A chart showing the favorite characters of anybody who selected no for the first question, and another chart showing the favorite characters of those who selected yes for the first question. Unsurprisingly, Olimar still won both polls. But we're not here to look at Olimar. For the chart of those who selected no, Olimar was the winner by a landslide, with the only other characters selected being Louis, Brittany, and Charlie. All three of these characters were relatively similar in terms of votes. Louis had a bit of an edge, but him and Charlie only had one vote of difference in their results. We already know that Olimar is the most popular character by far, but in terms of the other characters, it doesn't seem like there are any clear biases for those who are neurotypical based on this set of data. Now here comes the fun part. For the people who selected yes in the first question, Olimar won with only 47% of the vote, with Louis being at a very close second at 36%, and all other characters having anywhere from 0 to 4 votes, with third place being taken by Alf with only 7%. Therefore, we can see that in neurodivergent people, while Olimar is still the most popular, his popularity is slightly lessened by the overwhelming increase in people who like Louis, whereas the franchise's other characters for both sets of people are enjoyed far less overall. In the basic data, it seems like Olimar won by a landslide, but the sheer fact that Louis damn near exceeds him in neurodivergent participants proves my point. The difference between participants who selected Louis as their favorite based on if they're neurodivergent or not is staggering. The sheer percentage increase alone shows just how much this character's popularity is carried by neurodivergent players. And remember, this is taking into account only those who selected a specific response for the first question. So it's not like the sheer amount of neurodivergent participants outweighs those who are not, because the percentage of characters selected differs from those who said no and those who said yes. Louis has a dramatic difference in popularity based on the answer to the first question, something that no other character shows, which I think proves my point. Louis is popular because the community relates to him. Despite his downright antagonistic roles in the franchise, the people who play Pikmin games relate to Louis' struggles. Because of these themes of implied neurodivergence, I think Louis' relationship to his grandmother is also important to look at. She talked in the mail about Louis' childhood, how she forced him to eat bugs when he was little, and while this is played for a joke, I think there's a lot to be said about the consequences of an abusive childhood on the young neurodivergent mind. Louis' only family that ever gets brought up is his Nana, and he constantly brings her up. It's like a codependent relationship he can never escape from because his entire worldview has been altered by his experiences as a kid. It makes complete sense why he'd be so obsessed with food, mainly cooking bugs. And the way that this interest was pushed onto him at such a young age could be a major factor into him feeling like food and cooking is all he has going for him in his adult life, especially considering his continued connection to his grandmother. This is a bit more of a stretch, but I could even see Louis' attitudes towards his coworkers being a form of masking. Like, he has this image of himself that he feels he needs to keep up with in order to not step out of line. Like, if he was himself around these people, he wouldn't be accepted. Which makes me wonder if his decision to stay on the planet was fueled by a desire to get away from the people in his life who he perceives as hindering his own self-expression. There's a shocking amount to unravel with Louis' character, which makes him such an amazing foil to Olimar. He really is the Luigi of the Pikmin series, but not in the sense that he's just player 2. No, his character feels like a natural evolution of Olimar's character, showing the other side of hyperfixation and the curious spirit, the feeling of discovery. By representing Louis as a masking neurodivergent mind coping from years of trauma, only being able to confidently talk about his special interest in cooking, a byproduct of the world that was forced upon him by his loved ones. He's such a fascinating character, one who I feel gets overlooked far too often in the grand scheme of the series. He seems very much like a one-note annoying coworker, with his obsession with food just being there for laughs, and maybe some extra dialogue here and there. But he really isn't any of that. And just like Olimar was made to feel like a real person with a loving family and a mission because of his extensive dialogue, Louis is beautifully characterized through a lack of speaking that makes him a mystery at first, but an even more open book than even Olimar once you peel back the layers and see how he's perceived, and even how he perceives himself. Louis' characterization harps on Pikmin 2's biggest strength in my opinion, and that's expansion. Pikmin 2 is not just the first game, but more. It experiments, it expands, it pushes what Pikmin can be to its limits, and especially in the character department, we get to see an entirely new kind of character, with just as much depth and a whole new form of presentation. I mean, down to the game's very fundamentals, Louis is presented as different, even without explicit dialogue. The game's music literally shifts around him, switching to swing rhythm whenever you play as him. Louis quite literally hijacks the game's music to move to his own rhythm, and I think that is an amazing character detail that flows elegantly into the gameplay. Louis is unironically my favorite part of Pikmin 2. Or at least my favorite thing that this game introduces to the franchise overall. Pikmin 2 has a ton of great things that it gives to the rest of the series, but this expansion of the universe is by far the most impactful to me. Because Louis holds a special place in my heart. I relate to him. Sure, I don't eat bugs, but I do make multi-hour analysis videos about children's games in which I compare one of the main characters to the experience of being neurodivergent in today's world. And I'd argue that, in a way, that's just as weird. It's the kind of thing that very few people can understand the appeal of. And so I relate to Louis because I know how it feels to be misunderstood by the world, but more importantly, by yourself. So, that's the story of Pikmin 2 up to the credits rolling. But beyond that, the post-game allows us to go back to the main 3 areas and collect any remaining treasures we may have missed, now with Shacho by our side. But aside from that, rolling the credits also gives us access to the 4th and final area of Pikmin 2. So let's take a look at everything Pikmin 2's post-game has to offer with the final area. The Wistful Wild, the autumn or fall area. What an area. This place is incredible, down to every last detail. This area reuses both the impact site and the final trial for its map, remixing them into one place. Our base is in the arena of the Emperor Bullblacks for the first game, and the final cave is over by the start of the impact site. It's a journey back to the start of the series. I love it so much, but we're getting way ahead of ourselves. The overworld of the Wistful Wild is chaotic. It has 2 branching paths, one leading to the recreation of the impact site, while the other leads to where the base was for the final trial in the first game. The music in the area is wonderful. It's oddly peaceful, but still a frantic march. It uses a distorted electric guitar for the melody, and a backing sitar and acoustic guitar ensemble to add extra ambiance. It's a great theme, maybe one of my favorite themes in the game, although I'm not sure if it beats the other overworld themes. In any case, there's a roaming groink, but other than that, the overworld isn't too terrible. We got some blowhogs, cannon beetles, a crawmad, a few orange bulborbs, etc. We do have one new enemy though, the Ujidani. So the Ujidani are very weird. For one, they don't appear in the Piclopedia. We legitimately only know what their name is because of their e-reader card. They also only appear starting on day 31 and will reappear every 30 days, day 61, day 91, etc. So unless you really suck at the game, your only real opportunity to see them will be on day 31. They can attack, but they are poisonous, so you can use white Pikmin to take them out without any issues. When they die, they won't drop a corpse, but they will drop multiple sprays. So this is by far the best way to grind sprays in the entire game. You can try to use the double spray trick and push a captain into them, but honestly, it probably won't work. There will be so many sprays on the ground that it will be virtually impossible to isolate any particular one. But either way, you'll get an absurd amount of sprays, perfect for dealing with the rest of the area, mainly the caves. As for treasures in the overworld, there's really nothing special aside from a pretty big treasure directly next to your base. Kinda silly that they made a treasure so easily accessible in the final area of the game, but it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. You can quickly grab this one and holy shit! This is the Doomsday Apparatus, the heaviest object in the entire series, requiring the strength of 1,000 Pikmin. Now, since you can only have 100 Pikmin out on the field at any given time, the only way to carry this treasure is to use 100 purple Pikmin. A pretty difficult task, considering how valuable and rare purples are. If you don't have 100, the best way to grind more is by repeatedly entering the subterranean complex back in the Valley of Repose, but once you do have enough, you can head over to the Wistful Wild to carry back the treasure. Now, as we covered, purple Pikmin move slowly, so having only purples carrying the heaviest object in the game naturally means that they will carry it very, very slowly. And since you're using all 100 Pikmin on carrying this thing, you can't even do anything else while they carry the treasure. Meaning, you'll just have to sit and wait as they slowly carry the treasure back. Now, luckily, the treasure is right next to your base, so overall it shouldn't take that long, right? Well, even then, without any spicy spray, it takes over a fourth of the day to carry it back. That's over 3 minutes of sitting and waiting, being completely unable to do anything else. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of time. I've probably already been talking about this treasure for longer than 3 minutes, but in a game like Pikmin, where you're encouraged to multitask and make the most of every second, the screeching halt of the Doomsday Apparatus creates such a major tonal shift in gameplay that almost feels engineered to make those 3 minutes feel like an eternity by comparison, especially considering how close the part is to your base. So it's not like you're spending a few minutes watching them carry it across the map. No, you're literally watching them carry it like 2 feet at most. just slowly shuffling to the point that it barely even looks like they're moving. Now, all that being said, I still really like the Doomsday apparatus. I mean, don't get me wrong, I hate how it makes you sit and wait and do nothing. One of my biggest pet peeves in Pikmin games are when mechanics are introduced that are implemented with zero wiggle room and force you to wait before you can get anything done. Scorn it, Maestro. But despite my problems with that aspect of the treasure, I think the idea of having a treasure weighing 1,000 Pikmin is such an awesome idea. It forces you to save purple Pikmin knowing that you'll need 100 later, which sort of balances out how overpowered they are. You can't just sacrifice them willy-nilly unless you want to spend hours grinding and wasting them. Plus, I just think it's a really cool set piece to see the digits hit 4. It's telling you that there's no way around this. You need 100 purple Pikmin to carry this treasure. No more choices as to who carries what and what Pikmin are faster. The game is straight up telling you that there's no other option. And I don't know, something about just getting all your Pikmin onto one object for the first time in the series, watching that number climb up and eventually break into 4 digits, I don't know, it's just satisfying. The Wistful Wild only has 3 caves, but they're the longest 3 caves in the game by far, so let's not waste any time and get straight into the first one, the Cavern of Chaos. The Cavern of Chaos has 10 sublevels and a staggering 17 treasures. It's also the only normal cave in the Wistful Wilds, as the other 2 have some special circumstances that make them very out of the ordinary. For the sake of saving time, I don't think it's entirely necessary to cover every sublevel in the Cavern of Chaos. Most of them are just your average sublevel, just far more chaotic. So let's face it, this cave just won't be as interesting as the other 2 in this area. The first sublevel has a ton of bomb rocks and electricity. Sublevel 2 has 3 fiery bulblaxes, each containing a treasure. Sublevel 3 just has a ton of falling rocks, alongside some Mamutas, which make the sublevel seem peaceful until the rocks start falling. Sublevel 4 is our first interesting sublevel, as it technically introduces us to a new enemy, the Emperor Bulblax. No, not that Emperor Bulblax. This is a smaller, very weak version of the Emperor we fought back in the Bulblax Kingdom. They're just about as pitiful as they sound, although one of them is in the water, so you can either lead it out and curb stomp it with purples, or you can just put up with it and beat it with blues. So the fight is a little more interesting. There's only 2 Emperors on this floor, so it's not a huge issue. Sublevel 5 is a rest floor with candy pop buds. Sublevel 6 and Sublevel 7 are pretty basic floors with not much to talk about. Sublevel 8, on the other hand, is very interesting. This floor has 54 dwarf bulborbs walking around and 2 roaming Gatling groinks. It's extremely chaotic. The best way to deal with this floor would be to leave Pikmin behind and let the groinks shoot each other and the dwarf bulborbs, so it's a bit safer to walk back into the floor. It's a very interesting floor, and is probably one of the most memorable ones for me personally. Sublevel 9 has nothing interesting to talk about, and Sublevel 10 is the boss floor. The Cavern of Chaos's boss is the segmented Crobster. This is a really difficult fight. It will roll up into a ball and chase after you and your Pikmin at high speeds, crushing anything it comes into contact with. You'll need to lead it into a wall to have it roll onto its back to show its weak spot. But be careful, because after it hits the wall, boulders will fall from the ceiling to catch you off guard. It also won't stay stunned for very long, so it's extremely hard to get any damage in. The best strategy for dealing with the Crobster, in my opinion, is to leave behind purple Pikmin. They are way too slow and will be crushed during the fight. It's needless sacrifice. Plus, even when the Crobster is stunned, its weak point is just high up enough that purples have a really hard time reaching it. It's just not worth the effort. If your purples are flowered, and you can hit just the right angle to have them reach the weak spot, then purples can and will obliterate this thing, like everything else. But with the way the boss is designed, you'll be punished hard for using purple Pikmin, so it's best to leave them behind. I really like this concept because it gives us a boss fight that for once can't just be cheesed with purples, and you'll actually have to think and strategize in order to win this one. Without any sprays on deck, my best advice would be to bring reds for bonus damage and hope they outrun the Crobster. However, if you have a steady supply of spicy sprays, and being this late in the game, let's face it, you do, I'd actually suggest bringing yellows and whites and using spicy spray. Whites because they'll outrun the Crobster really easily, and yellows for the extra throw height to hit the weak point dead on. The extra attack speed will help a lot here. If you're short on Pikmin, you can also bring reds and blues, but they'll fundamentally just be the same. You won't get any extra height, and reds will be nerfed by the spray. Plus, they won't be as fast as whites. They'll still pack a punch if you land them, but if you want consistent damage, and trust me, you do, spicy spray your yellow Pikmin. The Crobster does not drop an upgrade. At this point, we've seen every upgrade in the game, but it will drop a treasure called the Silencer, a doll head worth 670 Pokos, but here's a fun fact. In the original Japanese release, it was worth 666 Pokos. This was most likely changed as a form of censorship. Moving on, the next cave we'll be talking about is the Hole of Heroes, the longest cave in the game at a staggering 15 sublevels, but only 13 treasures, making the rest floors in this cave truly rest floors with no treasures to collect. The Hole of Heroes has a pretty substantial gimmick. This cave is a boss rush. Almost every floor of this cave has a boss from a previous cave, while usually also having another gimmick to go along with the boss fight. This luckily means that floor analysis will go much faster because I don't have to discuss bosses I've already talked about. Sublevel 1 isn't too crazy. It eases you into the gauntlet with a simple yet chaotic first floor of chrysanthemums and sheargrubs. This floor has one treasure. Sublevel 2 pits us against bombs and electricity, while also screwing with our treasure gauge with an antenna beetle jumping around. And even once you beat the antenna beetle, you'll have to search for this floor's one and only treasure, since it's fully buried underground. Sublevel 3 is a blowhog floor. Watery, fiery, withering, and puffy. Also, 5 volatile dweevils because no fun allowed. This floor also has one treasure. Sublevel 4 is the beginning of the boss rush. This floor pits the player against a pileated snagret and a burrowing snagret. The pileated snagret has the treasure, so you'll need to at least defeat that one. The extra gimmick here is the giant sinkhole in the middle of the floor, slowing down your Pikmin substantially and making movement extremely difficult and clunky. You'll essentially just need to stand your ground and wait for the snagret to approach. Luckily, since this is a pileated snagret, that won't exactly be difficult to do. Unrelated, but as someone who has played a ton of Pikmin 2 ROM hacks, while I can't remember off the top of my head which hack did this, I distinctly remember having to fight a segmented Crobster in this room at one point. You know, with the sinkhole, limiting your movement. Always remember that no matter how evil Vanilla Pikmin 2 is, fans can, will, and have made it so much worse. Sublevel 5 is a rest floor. There are no treasures here, just one Queen Candy Pop Bud and 2 Glint Beetles. Sublevel 6 is really weird. It'd be much more fitting in my opinion if this were the 8th sublevel, considering the vibe of this floor is quite similar to the 8th Circle of Hell. You spawn on a little log surrounded by a pond. You'll have to dismiss everything but blue Pikmin, hope they don't fall off the log, and go defeat enemies, and collect a single treasure with just blues. It's not horrible, all things considered, but just make sure you bring a decent amount of blues to this cave. For this, and for another situation. Sublevel 7 brings us right back to the boss rush. This time we're dealing with the ranging Bloister, so as long as you have both captains alive, you'll be fine. Issues can arise with the 2 cannon larvae in the arena, but you can get them to kill each other with their own boulders pretty easily before you begin the boss fight, so this floor is really quite easy. Sublevel 8 is another rest floor. No treasures here, but we can get some Bulbmin to replenish our numbers. This is the 3rd and final cave in the game with Bulbmin, which is unfortunate. I really wish Bulbmin were used more in this game. I think 5 caves would have been a good number considering that'd be a little over a third of the game. If Bulbmin were just available in the final cave of Wistful Wilds, and maybe if they were in, like, Cavern of Chaos, I'd think that'd be enough for them. Mainly just in the post-game, with the 2 exceptions earlier, but I digress. Sublevel 9 is the Bulborb level. It has every type of Bulborb in the game, including a roaming Bulbear that will most likely bump into the sleeping enemies and wake them up, making the whole floor kind of a nightmare to deal with. A fiery Bulblax contains the floor's one and only treasure, so if you can help it, taking out the Bulbear first to make sure it won't interfere should be a top priority. Then you can sneak past the other grub dogs and take out the fiery Bulblax. Then just quickly deal with anything else blocking your path back to base, and you'll be fine. There's also a strategy of just lining up all the enemies in this pit here and punching them to death slowly, which if you have the rocket punch, this actually shouldn't take too long, but it is very boring. Sublevel 10 pits us against 2 small Emperor Bulblaxes, and yup, it's about as hard as you think it is. One of them has a treasure. This is a very easy get in and get out floor. Not much to say here. The next sublevel puts us against his better half, with our 3rd fight against the Empress. Not only does she produce Bulborb larvae like in the previous rematch, but the Empress can now also cause rocks to fall from the ceiling whenever she hits the side of the cave. These sound dangerous, but so long as you stay in the front and have another captain killing larvae in the back, you shouldn't be hit by any boulders. Sublevel 12 is the final rest floor. This one actually does have one treasure to find. All 3 types of flint beetles appear here to grind some sprays, and there's 1 Queen Candy Pop Bud to increase your numbers a little bit before moving on. Sublevel 13 is a rematch with the Man at Legs, although this time it's surrounded by water. The best course of action here is to spicy spray some blues and beat it like that. But being this late in the cave, you may not have enough, or any blues, to deal with this guy, so you could try and lead him out of the water and fight him with yellows or something, but definitely make good use of spicy spray here. This boss contains one treasure. Sublevel 14 is a rematch against the beady Longlegs with a ton of elemental dweevils surrounding the boss, including the caustic or hydro dweevil. So this dweevil only appears in the Hole of Heroes and the final cave. It's just a dweevil, but it sprays water. That's it. And it took us this long to talk about. Reminder that the volatile dweevil was one of the first enemies we talked about for this game. It's kind of insane how they just forgot about this one. The most interesting thing about it is its name change. On the GameCube and Wii, it was called the Caustic Dweevil, but this was changed for the Switch version to be the Hydro Dweevil. This change then kept when the enemy reappeared in Pikmin 4. What a weird enemy. It's by all accounts a basic dweevil, but for some reason this one in specific was saved for the very end of the game. In any case, you're just fighting beady Longlegs here. It's really not a tough fight. Sublevel 15 is the final floor, and it still is a boss floor, actually giving us a brand new boss to face. Surrounded by 4 jelly floats is the Raging Longlegs, a giant arachnorb that's extremely low to the ground and can therefore be killed pretty easily by purple Pikmin. It has giant feet and can easily crush Pikmin, so it's important to be careful when fighting this arachnorb. Don't stand under it, stand to the side and throw onto its giant abdomen and you should be fine. The creature gets its namesake from how it moves, since after you attack it, it will shake off the Pikmin, like any other arachnorb, and then stomp super fast in a fit of rage, which could catch the player off guard, but it's easy to avoid if you know what to expect. The Raging Longlegs drops the treasure Remembered Old Buddy, which is the head of a Rob robot from the NES. Get it? Remembered Old Buddy? Like R-O-B, like Rob, you get it. Well, this is it. The moment everything has been leading up to. Potentially one of the hardest challenges in all of Pikmin. The end of Pikmin 2 and the most iconic cave in the Wistful Wild. The final cave of the entire game. The Dream Den. With 14 sublevels and 21 treasures, this may not be the longest cave in the game, but it's a close second, and it has the most treasures by far. Technically, from the moment you unlock the Wistful Wild, the Dream Den is available. You could, in theory, do this before anything else in the area, however, it's commonly considered to be the most authentic Pikmin 2 experience to complete the Dream Den last, because by all means, this cave was designed to be the last challenge in the game, mainly because of what's on the last floor. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's give the Dream Den the same amount of respect we gave to almost every other cave in the game, and go through this floor by floor. Sublevel 1 contains 23 dwarf orange bulborbs and a few hermit crawlmads. There's only one treasure on this floor, so it's a nice and cozy start to a hellish cave. Sublevel 2 puts you up against a Gatling Groink on a pedestal. Yellows are best for taking this guy down. This floor only has 2 treasures. Sublevel 3 has a roaming bullbear and a ton of dwarf bullbears. The bullbear will drop from the sky to catch the player off guard, although you can easily tell where it will drop since any dwarf bullbears by that spot will go idle as they're waiting to follow the adult. So if you see dwarf bullbears just standing there and not looking around, you can easily track where the bullbear will come from. This floor has a ton of pits. You can lead the bullbear into one to kill it instantly, and you won't have to worry about carrying the body back either. Luckily, the game is programmed to spawn the treasure on the floor after it dies, so it won't disappear along with the bullbear. The treasure in the bullbear is the only one on this floor. This one is called the Glee Spinner and actually resembles the GameCube controller's control stick. Neat. Sublevel 4 has a ton of anode beetles and a cannon larva to deal with, making electricity and crushing, the 2 most deadly hazards, a common commodity on this floor. This one is really tricky to navigate as you'll need to use white Pikmin to take care of the poison emitters as well. Luckily, the one treasure on this floor is exposed and can be taken back once the coast is clear. Sublevel 5 is a fire-themed floor with a ton of fire geysers and a fiery bullblacks. The bullblacks contains the floor's one and only treasure. Obviously, red Pikmin are helpful here, but if you're smart, you won't have many red Pikmin for this cave. In fact, yellows and purples are gonna be your best friend for this place, so while this floor may be a bit of a speed bump, if you can get through it without many red Pikmin, those extra yellows will come in handy later. Sublevel 6 has some cannon larvae and a few jelly floats. The greater jelly float has the floor's one and only treasure in it. With the help of purple Pikmin, this floor is a cakewalk, at least compared to the rest of the cave. Sublevel 7 is designed to annoy you. The floor is tiny and tightly condensed with 4 Dirigibugs, 2 Puffy Blowhogs, and 3 Bumbling Snitchbugs. In such a tight space, dodging the bombs from the Dirigibugs is hard enough, but the Puffy Blowhogs will make Pikmin control very difficult, and the Bumbling Snitchbugs can really screw you over if they pick up both your captains and leave the Pikmin idle, ready to be blown up. This floor is very frustrating, and can lead to some catastrophic situations. My best advice would be to try and focus on one enemy at a time. Huddle up in a corner and try to lose aggro on most enemies on the floor, then slowly take out whatever comes towards you. If you can take out one of the Blowhogs and it happens to be the one that has the treasure, you can try to pick up that quickly and leave the floor before things get too messy, but the exit to the floor is blocked by a plug, and you'll need to destroy it. So a quick get in and get out strategy may not work in your favor. You just gotta play it by ear and take it slow. Sublevel 8 has a whopping 2 treasures, both out in the open. But you'll need to climb up a spiral of Dweevils, including the only other appearance of the Hydro Dweevil in the entire game, and 1 Antenna Beetle, which will screw up your radar. Overall, this floor is not a big deal, just a little annoying. Sublevel 9 is a rest floor with Flint Beetles. It has no treasures and doesn't even have Candy Pop Buds or eggs. It's the only rest floor in the whole cave, and with no Bulbmin or Candy Pop Buds in the whole cave, it becomes imperative that you keep your Pikmin alive for the next few floors. You won't have another chance to rest or regrow before the final boss. Sublevel 10 is my least favorite part of not only Pikmin 2, but the entire series. I wish I was joking. This floor puts you up against a roaming Gatling Groink surrounded by water with barely any room to move to avoid Pikmin drowning. This is the one and only point in which blue Pikmin are vital for this cave. You'll need 15 in order to get the treasure on this floor, so don't lose them. And let's hope you didn't lose any before this either. Try to lead the Groink over to land to quickly kill it. Then take your blues and find the treasure. I'd suggest using Spicy Spray to get it quickly and just avoid the rest of the enemies on the floor. But if you absolutely need to take care of them, try and lead them over to land to use purples, or just be very careful when fighting them with blues. This floor sucks. I hate it so much. Sublevel 11 is a bit more manageable. This floor has 2 treasures and a handful of easy enemies, like Bronits, Dwarf Bullbears, and some Blowhogs. There's a small amount of electricity, but if you take it out quickly, the area becomes pretty easy to explore. Sublevel 12 isn't a big deal either. There's a few orange Bulborbs and Wallyhops to deal with, plus some falling rocks, but by this point, you should be used to this level of chaos. There are 2 treasures to grab here, one of which is fully buried, so let's hope you still have some white Pikmin. Sublevel 13 is a bit odd. It's small and condensed, but there's only 6 enemies, 2 of each kind of sleeping Bulborb. Since they're asleep, they aren't super hard to deal with, but since they're so close together, they might wake each other up, which could lead to disaster. Just be careful and take out the orange Bulborbs first, since they're most likely to be woken up by you attacking other Bulborbs. There's only 1 treasure on this floor, and it's inside one of the orange Bulborbs. Finally, we reach sublevel 14. The final sublevel of Pikmin 2. In the middle of a clear boss arena, Louie sits atop a pile of treasure, but when we go to collect it, the final boss emerges from the ground. The Titan Dweevil. The Titan Dweevil begins a series trend of the final boss utilizing all the elemental hazards in the game, but in this case, it makes a ton of sense. Dweevils have been a common enemy throughout the entire journey, each using a different elemental hazard. In a way, they sort of represent all the Pikmin types, a perfect foil to the player's own arsenal. So the Titan Dweevil utilizes all the elements, carrying 4 different treasures to utilize each, just like how Dweevils have been carrying treasures throughout the game. It's a really neat idea. Now, we have to rescue Louie by defeating the Titan Dweevil, as well as getting all the treasures it has, but the Titan Dweevil works just like any other Dweevil. It cannot be damaged until all its treasures are knocked off. Since each treasure represents a different element, you can choose the order you knock the treasures off to get rid of certain elements and make the fight more manageable. Because of this mechanic, the Shock Therapist is both the most dangerous and least dangerous weapon on the Titan Dweevil, since it uses electricity. It can insta-kill any Pikmin type other than yellows. However, if you planned ahead and brought a ton of yellow Pikmin, you can leave the other types in a corner and fight this thing with just yellows, making the Shock Therapist completely useless against you. So the best strategy is to take in only yellows and focus on the Monster Pump, the water weapon. The Monster Pump is the only weapon that can hit outside the arena, so taking it out first is imperative as to make sure other Pikmin types are safe. At this point, there's 2 different options. You can either take out the Shock Therapist so it's safe to bring in your entire squad, or you can take out a different weapon, making it more likely for the Dweevil to use the Shock Therapist, which will be completely useless against you. You may think it's smart to take out the Shock Therapist first so that you can use purples for the rest of the fight, but just hold on a second, because leaving the Titan Dweevil with only the Comedy Bomb and Flare Cannon is extremely dangerous. Both of these weapons can still hurt the captains despite power-ups giving them immunity to fire and poison, and with how fast these weapons move, they can easily stun lock you, leaving you unable to save any Pikmin that got set on fire or poisoned. I would suggest taking out the Comedy Bomb next. It can easily stun lock you, and you most likely don't have many white Pikmin to deal with the poison anyways. If you went down this route, you may as well take out the Flare Cannon next. If you leave just one weapon that the Dweevil will spam, having one that stun locks you can be very annoying. So if you're down to just the Shock Therapist and the Flare Cannon, you should just fully commit to the Yellow Pikmin run and get rid of the Flare Cannon quickly. Then you'll have zero problems with the Shock Therapist later. If you decided to take out the Shock Therapist second, you can make the fight quicker with purple Pikmin, but you need to be proactive and stay around the edges of the arena, quickly escaping if it uses either of its weapons. You could also take out the Shock Therapist first and leave the Hydro Pump for last, that way you can use other Pikmin types as soon as possible and not worry about them being hit outside the arena, but I personally suggest going for either of the other two strategies. At the end of the day, it just comes down to how many yellow Pikmin you personally have left. Once all the treasures are removed, the Titan Dweevil becomes harmless. It can shake Pikmin off, but it cannot harm them. If you use Bitter Spray at this point, you can defeat it to get a ton of sprays. Not that this matters since this is the final boss, but hey, just in case you care, there's that. The Titan Dweevil drops the final 5 treasures of the game, all 4 of its elemental treasures, and finally, the King of Bugs. Louie is the final treasure of the game. He is worth 10 Pokos. So that's the final boss. Overall, I love the Titan Dweevil. I love how it's a giant super boss of a common enemy just like the Emperor was. I love how it uses all the elements and lets you strategize what elements to take out first. I love its creepy looking design, and I love the lore implication of Louie being atop it. The game plays it off as saving him, but it's also implied that he may have been controlling it. He is the King of Bugs, after all. Olimar comments that he may have been controlling the Titan, but he dismisses the theory entirely. It's unclear what he was actually doing, but here is my interpretation. I don't think Louie was actually controlling the Titan Dweevil, but I do think he had a connection to it. I don't think Louie has some kind of psychic link to Bugs that just seems a little crazy, but judging by the Dweevil's lack of aggression towards Louie, I think he may have become friends with the creature. I think, in a sense, he saw it as family, and I think that maybe the Dweevil was trying to protect Louie when it was fighting us. The game leaves us with the question: did Louie get left behind, or did he purposefully stay behind? And did we rescue him, or did we only think we did? Did he want to stay behind on the planet? It's an interesting question, and based on how he's characterized, I think it's the latter. I think he stayed behind on purpose. Louie seems to think he belongs with the Bugs. He has an odd connection to nature in that way. But that's all we can really gather about Louie right now. So I guess we'll just have to wait for the next game to see how his story develops. After exiting the cave, we get the real ending to Pikmin 2, the 100% ending. When all treasures are collected, we get another CGI cutscene of the crew flying off the planet and saying goodbye to the Pikmin. We get this beautiful shot of all the Pikmin bidding us farewell as the sun hits their flowers perfectly, making them glow in the sunset. And it reminds us that Pikmin 2 was just as much about the Pikmin as it was about the captains. Just like the first game was. What I love about Pikmin, the creatures, not the franchise, is the silent story that they tell. The story of the underdog, exploring a hostile environment and being creative to survive, that drive to discover. It's an amazing ending, one that does not get the attention it deserves. The 3 onions float up into the atmosphere to wish us farewell and dive back into the planet as we fly off. And we finally reach the end. Pikmin 2 is weird, but I love it. I love how experimental it is. I love that it pushed itself to try something new with the franchise and expanded the world tenfold. Pikmin 2 isn't perfect, and while the first game was accidentally perfect, the sequel is purposefully imperfect. These growing pains needed to happen. Pikmin 2 needed to be something new and unique to expand the franchise. It's frustrating, sure. Maybe there's a ton of decisions I don't like or wish were different. But while I can never say this is my favorite Pikmin game, it's still one of my favorite games. Because Pikmin 2 isn't perfect, but it perfected the art of expanding a world. Pikmin 2 works so well as a sequel because it took risks that paid off and fleshed out the Pikmin world in ways that felt weird and experimental, yet fitting and fun to discover. So while Pikmin 2 is my least favorite Pikmin game, and while my problems with the game cannot simply be ignored, I can still say with confidence that what I appreciate about the game is how it went about perfecting expansion.